Sherlock Holmes and the Puzzle of the Vanishing Ships, an honoring audiobook's original story. From the Reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D., Chapter 1's A Call from the Sea. It was the first bitter week of February in the year of our Lord 1891, when the case that would come to be known as the Vanishing Ships reached the attention of my old friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. London lay beneath a veil of icy mist, the kind of dense, clinging fog that seemed to wrap its arms about one's neck and press into the marrow. I had returned only recently from a surgical consultation in Glasgow and was rather looking forward to several weeks of quietude at Baker Street, where I hoped to devote myself to a modest series of essays on battlefield trauma in the colonial regiments. Alas, the fates, and Mr. Holmes, had other plans. It was just after 8:30 in the morning when I arrived at 221B, my boots damp from slush and my moustache crusted faintly with frost. Mrs. Hudson met me at the door, her usually impassive face drawn with a curious expression of nervousness. "Dr. Watson, sir," she whispered as she helped me out of my greatcoat. "He's not quite himself this morning." I raised a brow. "Holmes?" "Aye, and I dare say he's been pacing since 5. There's something on his mind." That was hardly unusual. Indeed, Holmes was seldom without some strange matter whirling through that remarkable brain of his. But there was a certain tremor in Mrs. Hudson's voice that gave me pause. I thanked her and climbed the familiar 17 steps to our sitting room. Holmes was precisely where I expected him, standing before the fire, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes narrowed in intense concentration. The hearth blazed with a fury I had not seen since the winter of the Thames murders. A curling trail of tobacco smoke ascended from the Persian slipper on the mantelpiece, and 3 crumpled newspapers lay about the floor as though hurled in frustration. He did not look up when I entered. "I see you've come prepared for a storm, Watson," he murmured, "and I do not speak only of the weather." I smiled faintly and took my usual chair. "And yet it appears you've already begun navigating one. What's this? Trouble with the Times?" Holmes's thin lips curled into something not quite a smile. "Not trouble, my dear fellow. Prophecy." With that, he bent, seized a folded sheet from the cluttered table, and passed it to me. Page 3. Marine Dispatches. I opened the newspaper, my fingers brushing over the heavy paper, and read aloud, "Mystery at Sea. 3rd merchant vessel lost in a fortnight. No survivors recovered from the cargo steamer Agolius." The Agolius, a 2,300-ton cargo steamer of the Royal Atlantic Mercantile, failed to arrive at Portsmouth Harbor yesterday as scheduled. The ship, which departed from Hamburg with a hold of textiles and machinery parts, is presumed lost. This marks the 3rd such disappearance in as many weeks. Following the unexplained vanishings of the Trenmore and Lady Vellum, authorities have released no further comment. Holmes watched me with an intensity that was almost fierce. 3 ships, Watson, all vanished. No distress calls, no wreckage, nothing but silence and sea spray. What does that suggest to you? I rubbed my chin thoughtfully. It suggests misfortune, storm, piracy perhaps, or submerged reef. Storms leave flotsam, piracy leaves blood, and reefs leave ruin. But these ships, he pointed to the article with a pale finger, have left not so much as a splinter behind. It is as though they have been swallowed whole. A knock came at the door, and before I could reply, Mrs. Hudson poked her head in. "Inspector Gregson to see you, Mr. Holmes. Says it's urgent." "Show him up." Moments later, the stout and reliable figure of Inspector Tobias Gregson entered, looking flushed from the cold and uncharacteristically grave. "Holmes, doctor," he nodded curtly. "You've read the papers, then?" "Indeed," Holmes replied. "You're here about the Agolius." Gregson's brows shot upward. "Confound it, man. How do you do that?" "Never mind," Holmes said briskly. "What news?" Gregson took the chair opposite and removed his gloves with slow precision. "The Home Office is rattled. Lord Charles of the Board of Trade summoned me personally. He believes this goes beyond maritime accident. There was a survivor. Barely." Holmes straightened. "Go on." "Name's Herbert Malkin, deckhand aboard the Agolius. Picked up last night by a fishing sloop off the coast of Kent. Found half dead, clinging to a barrel. No other crew recovered. He's in hospital at St. George's. And," Gregson exhaled, "he's raving. Sees shadows in the light, screams about a black fog and the sea opening like a mouth. The physicians believe he's in a state of severe shock." Holmes's eyes gleamed. A man may lie, Inspector, but madness rarely invents metaphor. Watson, get your bag. I blinked. We're going to see him? We are, my dear fellow, and we must make haste. The fog outside may be thick, but the fog around this case is thicker still, and I intend to pierce it. We arrived at St. George's by late morning. The hospital's southern wing was quiet, a grim corridor of polished tile and hushed voices. In room 12, we found a thin figure wrapped in hospital linens, his skin pale as salt, eyes wide and darting beneath sunken lids. Herbert Malkin? I asked gently, taking his wrist. His pulse was rapid, and a fine tremble ran through his limbs. He did not look at me, but stared through me, as though at something lurking just behind. Holmes approached the bed, folding his hands behind his back. Mr. Malkin, I am Sherlock Holmes. You are not alone now. We are here to listen. The man flinched at the name, as though it carried weight. His lips moved, forming no words. Then, in a whisper cracked like dry reeds, he said, Eyes. It had eyes, not human. Watching. Always watching. Holmes leaned closer. What did you see? The man began to shake. Fog, thick as wool. It came from nowhere. One moment we were sailing calm seas, and the next, blackness. Soundless. The engines died. No wind. Like a hand had wrapped around the whole ship. Did you see anything in the fog? I asked. His lips twitched. Lights? Pale green, like gas lamps underwater. And a sound. Not a horn, not a bell. A hum. Like metal singing. Holmes and I exchanged glances. This was no ordinary madness. What happened to the crew? Holmes asked. They screamed. Then silence. Then pulled into the water, like something below was sucking them down. Then nothing. He began to weep silently, his body racked with spasms of remembered terror. I administered a light sedative, and soon he lay still, lips murmuring the word eyes again and again. As we left the room, Holmes was silent until we reached the hall. Then he turned to me with fierce energy. Fog that descends with unnatural speed. A ship stripped of life without a sound. Green lights. A harmonic frequency. Watson, this is not the work of man. Or rather, not of any man unassisted by means mechanical or arcane. You believe it was deliberate? I am certain of it, and I intend to prove it. Back at Baker Street, Holmes wasted no time. He set to work amid a whirlwind of maps, telegrams, and maritime records. A large chart of the English Channel was unfurled upon the wall, the positions of the vanished ships marked with small black flags. The pattern was irregular, but not random. See here, he said, stabbing a finger at the eastern quadrant of the channel. Each disappearance occurred within a 30-nautical-mile radius, roughly centered around this region. He circled a blank stretch of sea. No islands, no reefs. But consider, the shipping lanes intersect precisely here. I studied the chart. A perfect place to stage an ambush if one had the means. Exactly, but to accomplish it undetected, that requires resources. Secrecy. And a knock interrupted him. This time, it was a telegram. Holmes scanned it and his eyes lit up. It's from my contact at Lloyd's. They've had reports of odd compass deviations and interference with wireless signals near the same coordinates. Someone is manipulating electromagnetic fields. But to what end? That, Holmes said, pinning the telegram to the wall, is what we must find out. I have sent inquiries to the Admiralty and the Meteorological Office. If these anomalies are being engineered, there must be records, someone watching the weather, the currents, the patterns. I stared at him. You believe someone is controlling the sea itself? He smiled grimly. Not the sea, Watson. The perception of it. If one can create artificial fog and distort compass bearings, then one may steer a ship into peril without lifting a hand. The question now is, who benefits? And that, I thought, was the question that would come to haunt us for weeks to come. Holmes sat, pipe between his teeth, and stared long into the fog-wreathed night beyond our windows. Something stirs in the deep, Watson, and I fear we are only beginning to glimpse its shadow. It was well after 2 o'clock when Holmes finally rose from his seated vigil, his eyes having scanned the maritime records thrice over. His long, angular figure moved like a shadow among the oil lamps and piles of books. He paused by the window, the glass fogged with the condensation of our breath and the cold from outside, and traced a circle upon it with his forefinger. Through it, I could just discern the gaslights of Baker Street glowing faintly through the mist. Watson, he said, without turning, we are not dealing with pirates, nor misfortune, nor mutiny. We are facing a deliberate orchestration, an operation whose scale implies both funding and a singular intelligence behind it. I closed my notebook and rose from my armchair, and yet we are no closer to identifying who or what they are. Not quite, Holmes replied. There is something you may have missed in Malkin's account. The fog, the hum, the lights, they suggest a convergence of disciplines not often encountered together. A mixture of engineering, meteorology, and, he paused, optical illusion. I blinked. Optical illusion? Holmes turned now, his eyes glittering. Think, Watson. Fog is not merely weather, it is a medium. It can be used to obscure, to reflect, even to project. Now imagine the use of advanced lenses, mirrors, perhaps devices akin to the lantern magic of the stage. You believe this is a trick? Not a trick. A calculated scientific misdirection. But we need confirmation. A rap at the door drew our attention, and Mrs. Hudson entered bearing another envelope. A man delivered this not 2 minutes ago, sir. Said it was urgent. Holmes took it, slit the seal, and read silently. His brows lifted. From a Mr. Elias Bracknell, owner of the Trenmore, one of the lost vessels. He wishes to meet, tonight if possible. Fajar, he's in town at the Northumberland Hotel. Another piece of the puzzle? I asked. Let us hope so. Dress warmly, Watson. The streets tonight may be thick with more than mist. The Northumberland Hotel stood on Charing Cross, its facade lit golden against the chill. We arrived shortly after 7, having passed through a city half submerged in fog. Even the gas lamps struggled to penetrate the veil, their light reflecting in odd halos that gave the street the appearance of some phantasmagoric dream. We were shown to the private lounge, a richly appointed room with mahogany paneling and a roaring fire. A man stood to greet us, tall, gaunt, with a hawk-like nose and eyes that flickered beneath bushy brows. He wore mourning black and carried himself with the rigid posture of a naval officer. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming. Mr. Bracknell, Holmes said, shaking the man's hand. We understand you lost the Trenmore. Bracknell gave a curt nod. Lost her, and 23 good men with her. She was my finest vessel. Steel-hulled, triple-screw engine, fitted with Marconi apparatus. And now, gone as though the sea swallowed her whole. Holmes sat. You believe it was no accident? I'm certain of it. On what basis? Bracknell reached into his coat and produced a narrow wooden case. He placed it on the table, opened it, and removed a small device wrapped in oilcloth. It was cylindrical, about the size of a man's fist, with copper coils and a protruding brass dial. This, he said, was recovered by a trawler near the Isle of Wight, 2 days after the Trenmore vanished. It was tangled in their nets. Holmes leaned in, examining it without touching. A magnetic disruptor? Bracknell nodded grimly. That was my conclusion. An artificial field generator, likely affixed beneath the hull. When activated, it would have interfered with compass readings, possibly even affected the Marconi. Holmes frowned. You believe someone planted this aboard? Or deployed it in the water, floating like a mine? I've served 30 years in the merchant marine. I know sabotage when I see it. And have you any enemies, Mr. Bracknell? The man's face darkened. Dozens, but one in particular. A man named Lieutenant Alaric Strom, formerly of the Royal Navy. Brilliant, but unstable. Court-martialed in '86 for gross insubordination and conduct unbecoming. He served aboard the Dauntless, where I once held command. We clashed often. He believed the Empire's mercantile fleets were corrupt extensions of capitalist tyranny, had grand ideas of leveling the sea lanes. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And where is he now? No one knows. Discharged and vanished. Some say he travels under an assumed name. Others whisper he runs a secret operation along the coast of Norway. But I never believed he was gone. Holmes stood. Your information may prove invaluable, Mr. Bracknell. I shall make inquiries into this Lieutenant Strom. As we took our leave, Bracknell called out, One last thing. A week before the Trenmore vanished, she reported being trailed for several nights by a lightless vessel, low in the water, silent, no flags. A phantom ship. Holmes turned slowly. That is most curious. Aye, but here's the most curious part. She sailed as though she knew every move we'd make, as though guided by invisible hands. We returned to Baker Street in silence, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. Holmes remained at the hearth long after midnight, his violin resting untouched by the window, his gaze distant. What are you thinking? I asked at last. That Bracknell's phantom ship was no ship at all, at least not in the conventional sense. I frowned. Explain. Holmes turned. Suppose you had unlimited resources. Suppose you were a man with a vendetta against England's trade empire. How might you strike? Disrupt the fleets. Indeed, but you'd want deniability. You'd need a base, remote, secure, and capable of launching these invisible attacks. An island, perhaps, lost amid the rocks and shoals of the channel. I stared. You believe Strom has built such a base? I believe he has built a weapon, and we must find it before more ships vanish. The next day was a blur of activity. Holmes dispatched telegrams to every naval station along the coast, requesting reports of unusual weather, compass failures, or strange sightings. I, meanwhile, scoured medical records for any others like Malkin, survivors of vanished ships who might provide corroborating accounts. By evening, we had results. 2 more survivors, I told Holmes, waving a slip of paper. Both confined to asylums, one in Devon, another in Jersey. Same symptoms. Terror of the sea, hallucinations of fog and lights. And look here, Holmes said, handing me a response from the Royal Observatory. They've detected atmospheric distortions, localized pockets of electromagnetic activity in the same quadrant we identified. They thought it was instrument error. I think otherwise. Holmes turned to his desk, where he had been constructing a map overlaid with strings and pins. He pointed to a cluster near a featureless part of the channel. There, he said. If I'm correct, that's where the base lies. But how will we reach it? We have no coordinates, no name, not even a hint of a landmass. Holmes gave a thin smile. We do now. A fisherman out of Dover reported seeing strange lights 2 nights ago, greenish flares just above the water, southeast of Alderney. I intend to go there myself. I blinked. You're sailing into the fog? He placed a hand on my shoulder. I shall require a surgeon, should the sea prove unkind. Will you come? My answer was immediate. Of course. Thus it was that, 2 days later, we found ourselves aboard the Beatrice, a small steam-powered launch chartered by Holmes under the guise of conducting scientific measurements of marine currents. We set out from Portsmouth, under the dull orange of a winter sunset, the channel stretching before us like a steel blade. Captain Godfrey, a taciturn man of few words, steered us toward the coordinates Holmes had triangulated. The crew numbered only 4, trusted men known to Holmes from past escapades, including a stout engineer named Fenwick and a youthful cabin boy named Thomas, barely 17. The fog descended by the 3rd day. It came not as mist but as a wall. Dense, black, and absolute, sound became muffled, our lanterns useless. Holmes stood at the prow, watching, waiting. There, he whispered. Listen. We did. A low hum, metallic, rhythmic, vibrating through the hull. Engines? I asked. Not ours, Holmes replied. Then we saw it. Lights. Pale green, ghostly, flickering just below the surface. And a shape. It rose slowly from the fog, something vast and curved like the back of some sea creature. But no living thing bore rivets. This was man-made, an iron dome, slick with sea brine, rising from the deep like an eye. The base. Holmes turned. Ready the launch boat. We go ashore. Holmes! I cried. You cannot. But he was already climbing into the dinghy. Watson, if we do not act now, others will die. Come. There is no time. With rifles slung across our backs, we rowed toward the rising island, its form half submerged and cloaked in fog. A narrow inlet led us into a hidden harbor, where strange towers jutted from the rocks, antennas perhaps, or lightning rods. We docked at a small metal platform and stepped ashore. The place was silent. And then a voice boomed, mechanical, amplified, surrounding us. Sherlock Holmes, welcome. You are expected. Holmes straightened. Ah, he said softly. Then the game is truly afoot. Chapter 2, The Iron Island. The metallic resonance of the unseen speaker faded into silence, leaving only the echo of its greeting vibrating in our ears. Holmes and I exchanged a glance, a silent affirmation of the perilous ground upon which we now tread. The small metal dock upon which we stood shuddered beneath our boots, as though alive with subterranean energy. A narrow passage carved into the rock, unnaturally smooth, unweathered by time or tide, lay ahead. Electric lamps buzzed softly overhead, their glow casting long pale shadows against the slick iron walls. This was no mere hideaway. This was a fortress of machinery, a bastion of invention and secrecy. Holmes advanced without hesitation, his stride purposeful. I followed, my service revolver drawn and concealed beneath my coat. The air grew warmer as we moved forward, and the hum of unseen machinery became louder, a pulse-like thrum that reverberated through my chest. We turned a corner into a broad corridor where mechanical ducts hissed steam into the air. Pipes, tubes, and riveted plates lined every wall, and I was struck with the overwhelming sense that we had entered the belly of some leviathan. Occasionally, we passed pressure gauges and glass dials whose needles danced frenetically. Holmes stopped at a bulkhead door bearing a sigil, a twisted anchor overlaid by an eye. He ran his fingers over it. A personal crest, he murmured. Not of any known naval fleet. Strom's design, perhaps. A symbol of his crusade. The door groaned open. Inside, a figure stood in silhouette beneath a canopy of arcing wires and glass tubes. He turned as we entered. Lieutenant Alaric Strom was taller than Holmes by an inch, lean as a whip and clad in a high-collared naval coat modified with steel buttons and mechanical clasps. His eyes, beneath silvered spectacles, burned with intelligence and fury. His hair was swept back in dark waves, and his left arm, from elbow to fingertip, had been replaced with an intricate brass prosthetic. "Sherlock Holmes," he said. His voice was measured, deep, laced with condescension. "And Dr. John Watson, you've come quite far for a funeral." "We've come to stop a madman," Holmes replied. Strom smiled thinly. "Madness is merely genius unchained. I presume you've deduced the essence of my operation? That you've weaponized weather, fog, and illusion to wreak havoc on England's maritime lifeblood? Yes. That you've hidden your base within this engineered island, detectable only by its anomalies? Indeed. But your purpose remains to be confessed. Then allow me the pleasure, just as Strom said, gesturing to a platform. Reluctantly, Holmes and I ascended. The room beyond was immense, a spherical command chamber, lined with control panels, periscopes, and flashing diodes. At its center stood a model of the Channel, rendered in brass and glass, with ships marked in miniature and clouds generated by puffing steam. Around us, uniformed figures manned consoles. "You see before you, gentlemen, a new kind of warship," Strom said. "Not one of guns and shells, but of silence and deception." Holmes walked slowly about the room. "You've created a machine that mimics natural phenomena, fog, currents, magnetic anomalies. With it, you can veil or mislead vessels at will. But to what end?" Strom's voice hardened. "You ask a nation-bred question, one born of loyalty to a corrupt crown. I was cast out by the Admiralty, smeared by men like Bracknell who feared my vision. The Empire has grown fat on the backs of sailors, while discarding its best minds. I will make the sea a theater of reckoning." I stepped forward. "You've murdered hundreds." Strom's brass fingers clenched. "Sacrifices. Every empire demands them. England has taken. I am merely redressing the balance." Holmes's gaze swept the room. "And what is your next move? You've proven your threat. What remains?" Strom turned to a large switchboard. "A demonstration. Tonight, a convoy leaves Southampton. 5 merchant ships bearing munitions. They will vanish into the mist." Holmes stepped forward. "Not if I stop you." "You cannot," Strom said. "You're already within my grasp. The sea belongs to me now." At that moment, a klaxon wailed. Red lights flared. A technician shouted, "Unauthorized launch from Dock 3. Surface vessel escaping." Holmes smiled. "You forget, Strom, I never travel without a contingency." Strom's eyes widened. "Your crew." "Yes," Holmes said. "Captain Godfrey has orders to alert the Admiralty. They'll be on you within the hour." Strom's fury boiled over. "Seize them!" he roared. Armed guards approached, but Holmes acted first. With a speed I had not seen in years, he pulled a smoke bomb from his coat and hurled it to the ground. We ducked as the chamber filled with gray haze. Alarms screamed and chaos erupted. Holmes gripped my arm. "This way, Watson." We ran, weaving between consoles, knocking over equipment to slow our pursuers. Bullets pinged off metal walls. Down a stairwell, through a hatch, and into a boiler corridor. "We need to disable the generator," Holmes gasped. "If we blind the base, they'll be helpless when the Navy arrives." We found it. A room the size of a chapel, dominated by a glowing coil suspended in magnetic levitation. "Tesla-inspired," Holmes muttered. "Brilliant and fragile." I saw his plan at once. We worked quickly, reversing valves, severing stabilizers. Sparks flew. Holmes threw a wrench. It struck the coil. A cascade of lightning erupted. "Run!" he cried. We fled as explosions ripped through the base. Steam vented from ruptured pipes. Red lights failed. Doors slammed shut. Strom's voice echoed over the speakers, now distorted. "You will drown with me, Holmes." We reached the dock. The Beatrice was there. Captain Godfrey waving madly. We leapt aboard just as the island behind us began to implode, the iron structure buckling, towers collapsing into the sea. Aboard the Beatrice, we sped away, the sea glowing orange from the fires behind us. Holmes collapsed beside me, soaked and breathing hard. "Well, Watson," he said, grinning through his exhaustion, "I'd say the mystery of the vanishing ships has surfaced." And with that, he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, as behind us the iron island vanished beneath the waves. I sat beside Holmes on the deck of the Beatrice, cradling my arm where a piece of flying debris had grazed me. Salt spray whipped across our faces, mingling with the acrid scent of burning oil that still hung in the air. The sea boiled in the distance, lit with flickers of orange flame and black smoke, a tomb of fire and steel swallowing the madman's fortress. Captain Godfrey gripped the wheel of the cutter, jaw set with iron resolve. His second mate, a stooped fellow named Riggs, barked orders to the crew to keep the engines steady. The sleek vessel cut through the waves with elegant desperation, fleeing the wrath of Strom's crumbling domain. Holmes, still breathless, roused himself and turned to me. "You are wounded, Watson." "Merely a scrape, nothing that will kill me before breakfast," I muttered, "though my ribs may argue otherwise tomorrow." His eyes, sharp despite the soot on his face, flicked back toward the horizon where the last metal tower of Strom's base shuddered and collapsed. A groaning wail echoed across the sea, part mechanical, part elemental, as if the earth itself cried out at what had been born and now died beneath its waves. "Did we get him, Holmes?" I asked. "Is Strom dead?" Holmes did not answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the wreckage. "I do not know," he said at last. "Men like Strom have a gift for survival, but we have set his plans aflame. That much is certain." A sudden shout from Riggs startled us. "Signal on the horizon, Captain!" Through a brass spyglass, Godfrey scanned the distance. "2 Royal Navy destroyers," he said. Relief flooded his voice. "And a patrol dirigible overhead. Seems our message reached London after all." Within the hour, the cutter was hailed, and we were taken aboard HMS Resolute, a gray beast of a warship bristling with guns and crewmen. We were greeted by Admiral Thaddeus Marrow himself, a silver-mustached titan whose chest gleamed with ribbons and whose handshake felt like a bear's paw wrapped in wool. "Holmes, Dr. Watson, we received your urgent signal just as the fog lifted. The Prime Minister sends his compliments." And questions. We were ushered into the officers' quarters and seated beside a wide oak table. Maps and reports lay scattered before us, and several aides flitted about with field radios and ciphered documents. Marrow pointed to the wreckage in the distance. "Explain what we've just witnessed." Holmes rose and paced slowly, hands behind his back. "You've just observed the collapse of one of the most dangerous naval threats England has faced since Napoleon. The base was not merely a stronghold, it was a technological weapon, a vessel in itself. Artificial weather generation, directional fogs, magnetic interference, all orchestrated to disrupt, disorient, and destroy. Strom meant to turn the seas into a graveyard." Marrow's brows knitted. "But why? What did he hope to achieve?" "Vengeance," I said, speaking for the first time. "He was cast out by the Admiralty. He saw it as betrayal. In his twisted logic, the deaths of merchant sailors were a toll to be paid by a government he despised." Marrow looked grave. "You say was? Are we certain he's dead?" Holmes' reply was slow and measured. "No body, no confirmation. And a man like Strom, I would not count him among the dead until I saw the breath leave his body." The Admiral gave a nod and looked to his aides. "Deploy search teams, wreckage patrols within a 10-mile radius, intercept any lifeboats or wrecked drifters." Turning back to Holmes, he added, "And you, sir, your service will not go unrewarded." Holmes waved the comment away. "I am not interested in medals, Admiral. What I require is information." "And what sort?" "A list of Strom's former associates, naval engineers, disgraced officers, anyone with the skill and the grudge to have aided him." "And what will you do with it?" "Finish what was started," Holmes said. "Strom's fortress may have drowned, but his war has not ended. That much I am certain of." We remained aboard HMS Resolute for 3 days as the Navy completed its sweep. The sea yielded little: twisted metal, half-melted machinery, and the broken skeletons of false buoys, decoys meant to mislead ships to their doom. No sign of Strom's body, nor of his brass-clad arm. Holmes prowled the deck restlessly, smoking pipe after pipe, muttering to himself in cryptic fragments. On the fourth morning, Marrow summoned us to the bridge. A message from Scotland Yard just came through. A fire at the Royal Maritime Archives in Portsmouth. Entire sections burned to ash. Blueprints, requisition logs, experimental patents. Arson. Undoubtedly. It happened the same night you destroyed the Iron Island. Holmes's eyes lit with fresh fire. A cover-up. Strom or his accomplices trying to erase traces of the project. Marrow nodded grimly. He may be wounded, but he's not finished. Holmes turned to me. We must return to Baker Street. At once? Immediately. Back in London, the city greeted us with the gray dampness that so often hugged its stone shoulders. Fog drifted between carriages and gas lamps as though mocking the false mists we had encountered on the sea. Mrs. Hudson wept at the door when she saw us. I thought you both lost. It was in the papers. Naval catastrophe, it said. The port is in mourning. Holmes, ever the ascetic, barely touched the tea she brought. Instead, he went straight to his study, where he tore into his files and books with feverish obsession. I watched him for an hour before I finally asked, "What exactly are you looking for, Holmes?" He tapped a dossier with a long finger. The architects of Strom's Revenge. He did not build that fortress alone. There were financiers, builders, technicians. The level of engineering, it surpasses one man's capacity. Strom may have been the visionary, but someone else supplied the materials. I need to know who. I glanced at the folder. These are all naval contractors? Naval, military, private science firms, and then, here. He held up a name, Malachi Venn. Never heard of him, I said. Holmes' expression darkened. Venn was a signal officer court-martialed in 1887. Dishonorable discharge, but he possessed an unnatural gift for coded transmissions. He once sent a message across 7 frequencies using nothing but a modified phonograph and piano wire. He vanished after his discharge. Rumors say he fell in with radicals. And you believe he's working with Strom? I believe he's out there still, Holmes said, and if we find him, we find the remnants of the Iron Island. That night, we followed a lead to a soot-blackened tavern in Limehouse called the Black Wake. The air inside was thick with pipe smoke, salt, and the reek of spilled porter. Holmes donned a disreputable cloak and assumed the limp of a wounded stevedore, while I kept near the door with my pistol holstered but ready. Holmes approached the barkeep, a lantern-jawed woman with a tattoo of a kraken on her arm. "I'm lookin' for Venn," he rasped in a gruff sailor's brogue. "He owes me coin." Her eyes narrowed. "Ain't seen him, and you'd best move along." Holmes slammed a silver sovereign on the bar. "That jog your memory?" Her fingers closed around the coin. "Try the pier, warehouse 7. Look for red paint on the door. If he's not there, he's dead." As we turned to leave, Holmes said quietly, "Note the tremor in her hand. She's frightened. Venn's name carries weight." We made for the warehouse under cover of night. The Thames lapped against the docks, and the sky was bruised with storm clouds. A gull cried overhead as we approached the rusted structure. Holmes examined the lock. Freshly oiled. Inside, the smell hit us first. Ozone, oil, and scorched parchment. Papers and blueprints littered the tables. Strange devices hummed softly in the gloom, and there, hunched over a glowing cylinder, was Venn himself. He turned as we entered. His face was sunken, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. "Holmes?" he said. "I knew you'd come." "No time for lies," Holmes snapped. "Where is Strom?" Venn chuckled, a dry, painful sound. "Gone. To the Leviathan's mouth. You'll never reach him in time." "What is the Leviathan's mouth?" I asked. "A trench, 40 miles offshore, deep enough to hide a kingdom. He's rebuilding. Better. Bigger. And next time, he won't strike ships. He'll strike ports." Holmes took a step forward. "Then he intends full war." "He believes the Empire must fall," Venn said, "and he's the sea's chosen hand." Holmes drew a revolver and pointed it at the engineer. "You will write every coordinate, every frequency, every code you've ever used to contact him. Or I swear, I will leave you to the mercy of your own machines." And Venn, trembling now, nodded. "Then I shall give you his grave before he digs yours." Chapter 3. Leviathan's Mouth. There exists a place on naval charts where even the most seasoned sailors avert their eyes. A point in the English Channel circled only in red ink and half-whispered curses. It is not named officially, for it is not supposed to exist. Yet there it lay, a gaping undersea trench, ancient and bottomless, known to smugglers, mutineers, and a few unlucky Admiralty men as the Leviathan's Mouth. And it was to this abyss that Sherlock Holmes and I, John Watson, were now bound. The HMS Dauntless, a newly retrofitted destroyer, bore us into the deep channel waters with all due haste. The sea for late April was unnaturally calm, so much so that it put the crew on edge. Holmes, meanwhile, stood by the helm in silence, eyes fixed on the horizon. His fingers drummed lightly on the rail, and though he seemed still, I knew his mind was anything but. Below decks, the prisoner Malachi Venn had been confined under constant watch. He had indeed delivered a series of coordinates, radio frequencies, ciphered schematics, partial, yet enough to point us toward Strom's new refuge. Captain Godfrey joined us on deck. "We're nearing the coordinates, Mr. Holmes. Submarinal depth increases sharply here. Sonar picks up unnatural formations." "As expected," Holmes murmured. "The trench is real, and Strom is rebuilding beneath it." Godfrey crossed his arms. He must have salvaged something from the Iron Island. No one builds anew so quickly. Holmes turned toward the captain. Strom's intellect is matched only by his foresight. He likely had contingencies, secondary construction platforms, fallback systems, perhaps even a mobile core for his weather generators. I stepped beside them. But how does one hide an entire base in such waters? Would not the Navy's charts detect it? "Not if it's mobile," Holmes said, "or shielded by natural geology." A crackle on the wireless interrupted us. "Bridge to deck, receiving anomalous static on the eastern band. Untranslatable Morse." Holmes snapped to attention. "It's him." We rushed below to the radio room. The operator played back the pattern, a series of clicks and silences forming a cryptic loop. Holmes listened intently. Not Morse, at least not standard. It's polyalphabetic, multiple channels overlaid. Venn's work. He scribbled furiously on a notepad, eyes ablaze. After 10 minutes, he stood grim-faced. "He's baiting us, sending coordinates." "An invitation. To what?" I asked. "A descent into the mouth." By midday, the Dauntless anchored above the trench. Depth charges had mapped a strange shelf 200 fathoms below, jagged and unnatural in shape. A diving vessel, HMS Sparrow, a prototype submersible, was lowered into the sea. Holmes, myself, Captain Godfrey, and 2 Royal Engineers were assigned to the descent. As the hatch sealed above us and the pressure locks hissed shut, I could not help but feel a tightening in my chest. We had faced many dangers, guns, poisons, conspiracies, but none so alien as this, descending into the black gut of the earth, where death was measured not in bullets, but atmospheres. Holmes, as always, remained serene. "Observe carefully, Watson. What we find below may redefine the boundaries of warfare and science." The Sparrow descended, its lights piercing the ink-dark sea. Schools of pale, blind fish scattered before our path. Then, at 180 fathoms, the wall of the trench loomed, a sheer vertical drop into abyss. Our pilot guided us slowly down the trench's side, tracing the rock face. Then, suddenly, light. "By God!" one of the engineers muttered. Below us, embedded into the wall of the trench, was a dome, glass and metal, pulsing with internal light. Towers rose like stalagmites from the ocean floor. Cables tethered the base to the seabed. Strange shapes moved behind reinforced windows. "The Leviathan station," Holmes whispered. Then the Sparrow jolted. "Magnetic pull!" cried the pilot. "We're being drawn in." The vessel shook as mechanical arms seized us and guided the submersible into a docking bay. Seawater drained rapidly. Alarm sounded. "Prepare yourselves," Holmes said, rising and checking his revolver. "We are no longer guests." The doors opened. We stepped into an airlock chamber lit by bluish lamps. The walls here were sleeker than those in the Iron Island, more advanced, more alien. Panels hummed with invisible power. Footsteps echoed in the distance. And then he appeared. Alaric Strom. Clad now in a reinforced diving suit adorned with metallic joints and an extended breather collar, Strom looked like some ancient warrior reimagined for the age of electricity. His prosthetic arm gleamed brighter, more fluid in motion. He stood tall, unmarred by injury. "Sherlock Holmes, you persist like a thorn in history." "And you, Strom," Holmes said, stepping forward, "persist like a wound." Strom smiled thinly. "Welcome to the final phase. You've seen my teeth. Now behold my jaws." He gestured and doors opened to reveal a command center unlike any I had seen. Holographic projections flickered above tables, sonar readouts mapped entire sections of coastline, and vast machines churned chemical compounds into tanks labeled with warning symbols. In 3 days, every major port from Southampton to Dover will be swallowed in fog and flame, Strom announced. The Empire will choke on its own sea. Holmes stepped slowly around a large device. And who stands with you now? Your Iron Island is lost, your engineers captured. Venn has betrayed you. Has he? Strom asked, amused. He may have given you a key, but not the door. Suddenly the lights flickered. An alarm klaxon blared. Strom's amusement vanished. He turned to a technician. Report. Intrusion on level 3. Dock sabotage. Holmes' eyes met mine. He's here. Venn has unfinished business. Gunfire echoed through the walls. Secure them, Strom shouted. We were seized by guards in armored suits. Holmes struggled, but was held fast. Strom drew a weapon of his own design, half pistol, half electric prod, and pressed it to Holmes' chest. You will not leave this place. But at that moment, an explosion rocked the station. Flames burst from a side corridor. Steam vented from ruptured pipes. From the smoke emerged Venn, bloodied but alive, wielding a stolen rifle. Run, he shouted. I've collapsed the supports. The trench will bury it all. In the chaos, Holmes headbutted his captor and grabbed his revolver. I followed suit. Bullets ricocheted as we darted through collapsing corridors, Venn leading us back to the dock. There's an emergency launch, he cried. We found it, a 2-man pressure pod. Holmes and I climbed in. Venn shook Holmes's hand through the hatch. Tell them. The sea remembers. Before Holmes could respond, Venn slammed the hatch and ran back toward the fire. The pod launched, upward through the abyss, pursued by light, then shadow, then silence. When we awoke, we were aboard the Dauntless. Days had passed. The Leviathan station was gone, collapsed into the trench, swallowed by the earth. Strom's fate remained unknown. Venn's body was never recovered. Holmes stood at the prow, coat billowing in the sea wind. He looked not triumphant, but tired. Evil, like oil, always seeps into the cracks, he murmured. We may seal this trench, but the pressure builds elsewhere. I nodded. Still, for now, the sea is calm. He did not reply, but in his silence I understood. The game was not over, merely paused. The sea outside the observation port of the recovery vessel Dauntless was deceptively peaceful. We had survived the impossible, and yet the weight of what lay beneath us, lost forever in the collapsed trench, pressed upon my soul like an anchor. Holmes, though composed, bore the pallor of a man who had glimpsed a truth too large for comprehension. We remained on deck long into the morning, the gray light of dawn turning the channel into a great mirror, as if reflecting the monstrous deeds that had just transpired beneath. Do you believe he perished? I asked, my voice low, barely carried over the hum of the engines. Holmes remained silent for a long moment, his profile marble silhouette against the brightening sky. Strom is no ordinary man, he finally said. He has survived disasters that would have destroyed empires. I do not trust that the sea has claimed him. You think he escaped? I think he planned to escape, Holmes replied. Whether he succeeded, I cannot yet say. Below deck, the officers of the Admiralty were already preparing reports. Carefully sanitized, of course. The true nature of Strom's operations, weather manipulation, subsea fortresses, biochemical dispersal units, would be hidden from the public. Labeled a rogue naval saboteur, a convenient lie to calm the masses. But I had seen the schematics. I had watched the fog machines release their dreadful vapor. The weapons Strom developed were decades ahead of our time. Chemical weather systems, biological camouflage networks, magnetic propulsion. And he had spoken of others, jaws yet unbared. Holmes, I asked suddenly, if Strom had others, more of these bases, what stops them from continuing in his absence? A flicker passed across Holmes' features, and he gestured for me to follow him to his quarters aboard the Dauntless. Once inside, he pulled a locked satchel from beneath his cot and spread its contents on the table. Among the papers were maps marked with strange glyphs, ciphered journals we had confiscated from Strom's laboratories, and an incomplete blueprint stamped with a mark we had not seen before. A trident pierced by a lightning bolt. A new symbol? I asked, bending over it. Holmes nodded. This appeared on the inner consoles of the Leviathan station, and here, he pointed, in Strom's personal journal, a reference to something called the Thalassian Compact. Sounds mythological. Possibly. Or it could be the codename of an alliance. Perhaps he was not working alone. The notion chilled me more than the depths ever had. Do you recall Ven's final words? Holmes asked. I nodded. Tell them the sea remembers. Poetic, yes, but also purposeful. The sea remembers. What if Strom's work, his legacy, is encoded in the very waters around us? Devices still active, labs buried under miles of pressure, waiting. If Strom knew he would fall, he might have ensured his vision did not die with him. I was silent. Then, almost absently, I asked, and Ven? Holmes looked down at the journal. A man seeking redemption. I do not know if he found it, but he gave us time. We must use it. That evening, back in London, we returned to Baker Street. I was grateful for the familiarity. The scent of pipe smoke, the soft creak of floorboards, the reassuring clink of glass and decanter as Mrs. Hudson prepared brandy. Holmes had hardly taken off his coat before he was at the fireplace, journal open, scrutinizing every line. I sat across from him, trying to make sense of a sketch I had made aboard the Dauntless, a dome-shaped structure with concentric rings and what I now believed to be emitter pylons. Holmes, I said, if this Thalassian compact exists, if Strom was its front, then who leads it now? He looked up. That, Watson, is the question that will determine whether England's coasts remain safe or drown beneath unnatural storms. He tossed a sheaf of notes toward me. Begin here. Names, dates, financial records. I frowned. What am I looking for? Patterns, Holmes said. Ghosts in the ledgers. Men who disappeared after Strom's discharge. Foreign envoys who visited naval bases unannounced. Unusual spikes in funding to obscure research facilities. This was never a one-man operation. And so we began to dig. The days that followed were spent in a peculiar rhythm of relentless analysis and restless anticipation. Holmes corresponded with his brother Mycroft, who was deeply embedded within the labyrinthine folds of government bureaucracy. The elder Holmes was infuriatingly cryptic, but he did confirm one suspicion, that Strom had contacts within the Admiralty even after his discharge. One name surfaced repeatedly, Admiral Lysander Merrick. A war hero turned reformist, Merrick had been among those pushing for maritime automation and alternative energy. He had once advocated for the very technologies Strom later perverted. It was Merrick who had overseen the decommissioning of several covert naval stations after the Second Anglo-Boer War, and it was one of those very sites, off the coast of Cornwall, that Strom's agents had briefly reoccupied. We traveled to Devonport at once, under the guise of ministry auditors. There, in a neglected annex of a records building, Holmes unearthed a sealed dossier, Merrick's private research correspondences. In it were letters addressed not to the ministry, but to an entity marked only by a sigil, 3 concentric circles surrounding an eye. No name, no rank, just references to Phase 3 and weather pattern resonance testing. One letter stood out above the others. It read, "The Leviathan platform is the first tide upon which the world shall change. Should it fail, proceed to trireme locations. The sea remembers. The plan endures." Holmes folded the letter slowly. "So it's true," he said. "What is?" "There are more stations." We returned to London with haste. That night, Holmes convened a quiet meeting with Inspector Lestrade and 2 members of Naval Intelligence. In a hidden briefing room below the War Office, Holmes presented the evidence. "There are 3 sites," he began. "The Leviathan station was merely one. The others, called triremes, are likely smaller, distributed across maritime choke points." "Do you have coordinates?" asked the intelligence chief, a terse man named Ashcroft. "Fragments," Holmes replied, "but enough to act." Lestrade leaned forward. "And Strom?" Holmes's eyes glittered. "He's alive, somewhere, and unless we dismantle the network he's built, England will face a storm no navy can sail through." There was a silence in the room. Then Ashcroft nodded. "Then we prepare to strike." Back at Baker Street, I found Holmes staring out the window at the gas lamps, his violin untouched beside him. "What is it?" I asked. "I'm missing something," he murmured. "Something Strom said." I waited. He called me a thorn in history. Not just in his history, in history itself. That implies a wider game, a longer plan. I furrowed my brow. "You think this goes beyond sabotage? Beyond revenge?" Holmes turned to me. "I think Strom is not merely avenging himself on the Empire. He's trying to rewrite the course of technological evolution, to direct it toward a future only he understands. The fog, the ships, the vanishings, they are not the end. They are the beginning." He tapped the Leviathan blueprint. This was his prototype. He paused. and we've just begun to understand what it can do. Chapter 4. The Trireme Conspiracy. There are moments in one's life, sharp, glinting intervals, where the veil between the visible and the unseen lifts ever so slightly. As Holmes and I descended the worn steps of the War Office into the sub-basement archives, I sensed such a moment had arrived. It was the second week of May, and though the streets above bustled with the usual clamor of London's commerce and horse-drawn chaos, below the earth, we walked in utter silence, save for the rhythmic creak of floorboards and the distant hum of electric light. "Holmes," I said, trying to still my nerves, "do you truly believe this Trireme Conspiracy to be more than a code name?" "I believe," Holmes replied without turning, "that we are dealing with a hydra. Cut off one head, Leviathan, and two more emerge. The conspiracy is not merely real, Watson. It is resurgent." The archive chamber was a narrow corridor lined with file cabinets that stretched into shadow. There, a custodian, a former field officer turned clerk, unlocked a chest containing redacted naval intelligence reports. Holmes rifled through them with unrelenting precision. I watched his face change shade by shade as he extracted maps, weather logs, and internal correspondence stamped confidential in bold red ink. He laid out 3 maps across a table. "These, Watson, are Strom's shadows. Each one matches a series of meteorological anomalies that cannot be explained by natural means. Sudden banks of fog, magnetospheric disturbances, shipboard compass failures. The reports were dismissed at the time. Routine malfunctions, they said." "But the pattern?" I asked. Holmes tapped the 3 locations, the Orkney coast, the Scilly Isles, and a point 70 nautical miles west of Brest, France. 3 points. 3 stations. Triremes. I leaned in, examining the positioning. They form a triangle. Indeed, a maritime triangle designed for maximum coverage across the North Atlantic shipping lanes. If activated in unison, they could control the weather across half the channel, I finished, breathless. Holmes nodded grimly. Or worse. 2 days later, we found ourselves in the cold spray of the Northern Sea. The Royal Navy had mobilized 3 destroyers under false pretenses, each bound for one of the suspect coordinates. Holmes and I accompanied the HMS Resolute north toward Orkney, while agents of naval intelligence handled the other 2 targets. The journey northward was bleak and foreboding. The sea roiled unnaturally, despite clear skies. At night, the wind carried a strange resonance, like a distant, droning hum. We passed abandoned fishing villages, places where Strom's fog had rolled in weeks earlier. Some remained empty, their docks splintered, their trawlers sunken like drowned beetles. The survivors we questioned stared at us with glassy eyes. "They came from the water," said one old man, swaddled in wool and terror. "Tall men, no faces, machines hissin' in their bellies." Holmes pressed him for more, but the man merely repeated it, a mantra. "No faces, machines hissin' in their bellies." Holmes turned to me that night as we reviewed the man's words. "Mechanical divers," he said. "Strom must have outfitted submersible suits capable of surviving the pressure, perhaps even automata." "Automata?" I asked. He nodded. "Clockwork soldiers. I've seen prototypes in Berlin, but nothing on this scale." On the 4th day, we reached the Orkney Trench. Divers were dispatched. Holmes and I monitored the descent from the operations deck. The underwater telegraph clicked with updates. 50 meters. Seabed reached. Unnatural metallic structures sighted. Repeat. Structures confirmed. Then static. "Line's dead," the signal officer said. "Surface them." "Now," Holmes commanded, but the divers did not return. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Then the sonar operator shouted, "Movement! Beneath the surface! Fast approaching!" From the gray water rose a thing I shall never forget. A man-shaped form covered in green-black armor, riveted and jointed like a suit of medieval plate, yet sleek, seamless. It emerged from the sea with unnatural grace, mounted the destroyer's starboard deck, and began to hiss. Gas erupted from vents in its chest. "Gas! Mask up!" Holmes cried. The crew scrambled. The automaton began to walk, step by grinding step, toward the control tower. I raised my revolver and fired. The shot pinged harmlessly off its helm. Holmes grabbed a harpoon from the emergency kit, jammed it into the automaton's knee joint, and twisted. Sparks flew. The creature spasmed, then fell, its power source whining into silence. A second and third emerged, but the gunners were ready. Heavy rounds tore through their chest casings, revealing an inner core, a swirling blue crystal, suspended in a magnetic field. Holmes knelt beside the wreckage. Not automata, he said softly. Biotech. There are organic components within. I shivered. He's fusing man and machine. Holmes retrieved the crystal. This is the heart, some form of resonance engine, and it is not of any science known to me. The crew was rattled but functional. Holmes immediately dispatched coded messages to the two other destroyers. If these things are protecting the sites, we must assume the other teams will face the same resistance. Can we stop them? I asked. We can try, Holmes replied. But we must descend. By dawn, Holmes and I were inside a deep-sea pressurized capsule attached to the Resolute's submersible line. As we descended into the trench, the walls closed around us like the gullet of some enormous beast. The light above faded. The thermometers ticked down. Then, illumination. Spotlights revealed the second trireme station. Unlike Leviathan, this one resembled a sunken cathedral, spires rising in impossible angles, black alloy riveted with copper tubing. It was half buried in sand, but operational. Holmes leaned forward. We must breach it. The capsule docked with a pressure tunnel. We entered the station through a decompression hatch, pistols drawn. Inside, all was silence. Until it wasn't. The interior flickered to life as if sensing us. Lights illuminated corridors, machinery whirred. Then, a voice. Holmes, it said. Smooth, synthetic. You survived. It was Strom, or a recording thereof. Did you truly think the collapse of one station would unmake me? The compact lives, Holmes. I merely slumbered while others awoke. The lights shifted. A console opened. Holmes studied it, fingers dancing across the controls. He's still linked, he muttered, broadcasting across the trireme network. I turned. Can we disrupt it? Yes. With enough power, we can overload the resonance nodes. Holmes, I said urgently, look! Through the viewing port, dozens, no hundreds of the armored forms were assembling on the seabed, walking in lockstep toward the surface. They're preparing for an assault, I said. No, Holmes said. They're migrating. The third trireme is about to go active. These are its army. He keyed a series of switches. Stand clear, he said. I'm going to detonate the station. But we're still inside. Before I could finish, the alarms began. Pressure valves screamed. Steam exploded from overhead vents. We ran, racing back to the capsule. Holmes threw himself in behind me and slammed the hatch shut. Cut us loose, he shouted to the surface via telegraph. The cable snapped. We ascended fast, too fast. My ears bled, my vision blurred. And then, daylight. We broke the surface, gasping. Behind us, the sea boiled. A tremor rippled across the water. Then silence. That night, back aboard the Resolute, Holmes was not celebratory. He studied the crystal we had recovered with quiet dread. This war has just begun, he said. Strom is not merely trying to conquer. He is evolving the very fabric of man. He has made war machines from the drowned and prophets from silence. And the third trireme? I asked. Holmes stared toward France. It must be destroyed. But how? We must find the architect, he replied. Strom cannot do this alone. He has a partner, someone who knows the language of the deep. He opened his journal and wrote one name. Moriarty. The following morning, the sea had calmed, but the air remained thick with a palpable tension, as if the waters themselves whispered warnings to those who dared listen. Holmes and I stood on the Resolute's deck, the chilling dawn light casting long shadows over the waves. The ocean was deceptively serene, but our encounter with the automata and the submerged trireme station told a different story, one that involved unnatural science and horrors lurking beneath the waves. Holmes held the blue crystal, the mysterious resonance engine, extracted from the mechanical warrior's core, in the palm of his hand. His keen eyes scrutinized it as though it might reveal its secrets under mere gaze. This device, Holmes murmured, is far beyond the bounds of anything in current scientific circles. I suspect it generates a kind of magnetic field resonance that disrupts natural electromagnetic patterns. Such disturbances could explain the compass malfunctions and unnatural fog banks reported. I nodded, struggling to reconcile the esoteric science with the very real danger we faced. A mechanized soldier infused with organic material, I added. A frightening hybrid of man and machine. Do you think this is the future of warfare, Holmes? He regarded me with a steely gaze. Perhaps, Watson, but it is also a perversion of man's natural order, a perversion crafted by a mind consumed with vengeance and ambition. Strom's legacy, as dreadful as it is, may yet prove to be a warning rather than a prophecy. Our reprieve was brief. A coded message crackled over the ship's wireless. The destroyers assigned to the other 2 trireme locations were under assault. The reports were dire. Heavily armored aquatic warriors, similar to those we had faced, were emerging from the depths, attacking vessels and personnel with ruthless precision. Holmes's brow furrowed deeply. It seems the Compact is fully mobilizing its forces. That afternoon, as the Resolute steamed toward the last known coordinates of the 3rd trireme, Holmes and I convened with Commander Ashcroft and Inspector Lestrade in the ship's war room. The tension was thick. Men who had seen battle seemed less sure now. "Gentlemen," Holmes began, "our adversary is no mere criminal or disgruntled officer. We face a coordinated operation of unprecedented scope, one that blends cutting-edge science with maritime subterfuge." Ashcroft's face was grim. Can the station be destroyed? Can the assault be repelled? Holmes shook his head. Not without first locating its base of operations. Our current evidence suggests it is on a remote island, deliberately concealed from nautical charts. The island itself may host laboratories and weapons facilities. Lestrade leaned forward. "Any leads on this phantom isle?" Holmes reached into his satchel and produced a faded map, marked with a series of uncharted islands in the channel. Among these, one is known only as the Siren's Hold, a place rumored among mariners but dismissed as myth. We must investigate. The next day, the Resolute altered course toward the Siren's Hold. The journey was marked by intermittent fog banks, unnerving in their unnatural density. Holmes's suspicions about the weather manipulation were confirmed at every turn. That night, as the ship sailed through the ghostly haze, Holmes stood on deck, his gaze piercing the mist. "Watson," he said softly, "what do you make of the name Siren's Hold?" "An apt name for a place that might lure sailors to their doom," I replied. He nodded. "Exactly. And what if the siren is not a myth, but a machine?" By dawn, the island emerged through the fog, a jagged silhouette against a bruised sky. As we drew closer, we noticed a vast network of cables snaking from the rocky shore into the sea, connecting to submerged structures that hummed with eerie energy. Holmes, Lestrade, and I prepared for a landing party. The island was uninhabited on the surface, save for rusting equipment and the remains of a long-abandoned lighthouse. Exploring the island, we discovered a concealed entrance, a hatch leading underground. The air was thick with the scent of salt and something more metallic, something faintly acrid. Inside, we found a sprawling complex of laboratories, control rooms, and workshops. The walls were lined with arcane devices and diagrams of atmospheric phenomena. There, the true extent of Strom's ambition became horrifyingly clear. Holmes pointed to a large central console displaying intricate patterns of electromagnetic waves and weather maps. "This is the heart of the operation," he said, "the machinery that controls the fog banks, the storm fronts, and the resonance fields." Suddenly, the door hissed shut behind us. We were sealed in. A voice echoed through hidden speakers, calm, measured, and dripping with malice. "Welcome, Mr. Holmes. You have done well to come this far, but your curiosity will be your undoing." From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, a tall man with a naval bearing and cold eyes that gleamed with fanaticism. "Admiral Lysander Merrick," Holmes said, recognition dawning. "The architect." Merrick's lips curled into a smile. "Indeed, I am the one who took Strom's vision and brought it to fruition. England's merchant fleet is obsolete, a relic of a bygone age. The future belongs to those who control the sea and the weather, and thus the fate of nations." Holmes's expression hardened. "And what of the innocent sailors? The vanished ships?" Merrick's smile vanished. "Collateral, necessary sacrifices on the path to greatness." The confrontation that followed was tense, filled with verbal sparring and psychological games. Merrick revealed his plan: to dominate maritime trade routes by controlling the weather, crippling rival fleets through engineered storms and fogs, and ultimately establishing an empire governed not by ships and cannons, but by elemental power. Holmes countered every argument with incisive logic and moral clarity, but Merrick was unshaken. "You are a relic, Holmes," he said, "clinging to the past while the world moves forward." I stepped forward, heart pounding. "This isn't progress, Merrick. It's madness." Before the situation could escalate, the sound of distant engines interrupted us. The other destroyers had arrived, having followed our wireless signals. Realizing his position was compromised, Merrick triggered an emergency protocol, activating the complex's defenses. Automata emerged from hidden panels, and fog generators began to hiss, releasing dense clouds that obscured vision and choked the air. Holmes shouted commands, rallying the men to defend the entrance. We fought desperately as the station's defenses closed in. Holmes and I managed to reach the central console and began the shutdown sequence, racing against time as alarms blared and the machinery threatened to engulf us. Finally, with a resounding hum, the systems powered down. The fog lifted, the automata collapsed, and Merrick, seeing defeat, vanished into a concealed passage. Breathless and battered, we regrouped with the naval officers. Holmes's discovery had unraveled the conspiracy, but Merrick remained at large. As the sun broke through the clouds, Holmes turned to me. "This war is far from over, Watson," he said, "but today we have dealt it a blow." I nodded, knowing full well that the sea's mysteries and men's ambitions would continue to clash in shadows and storms. Chapter 5: Shadows in the Fog. The dawn was still young when the Resolute slipped away from the Siren's hold, leaving the island and its forsaken machinery shrouded in a brittle mist. Though Merrick had escaped, his shadow lingered over us all like the thick fog that refused to lift from the sea. Holmes stood silently on the aft deck, his gaze fixed on the horizon where sky and water blurred into indistinguishable gray. I approached him cautiously, sensing the tempest that raged within his mind was far from quelled. "Holmes," I ventured, "this Merrick, a man who wields the weather like a weapon, who commands mechanical soldiers. It seems the very laws of nature bend to his will. How does one begin to combat such an adversary?" Holmes's eyes flickered with a rare softness, and he responded not with the usual briskness, but a steady, contemplative tone. "Watson, all great mysteries are rooted in human weakness. Vanity, greed, vengeance. Merrick is no exception. His intellect is formidable, yes, but his ambition blinds him to the simplest truth. No man can control the sea and live unscathed." He paused, then gestured toward the map spread on the table in the ship's cabin. "Our next course lies here, in the port of Falmouth, a place Merrick frequented before his exile from the Royal Navy. It is there we shall seek allies and perhaps a clue to his next move." Falmouth greeted us with the salted tang of seaweed and the bustling cries of fishermen unloading their catch. The harbor was a tangled maze of masts and rigging, the air thick with the promise of rain. It was a stark contrast to the clinical coldness of the Siren's hold. Holmes moved through the town with the practiced ease of a man who belongs to every street and alley. I followed, admiring how he gathered information with mere glances and quiet questions. Our primary lead was Captain Elias Hargrave, a retired mariner with ties to the merchant fleet and a reputation for knowing the sea's whispered secrets. We found him in a dimly lit tavern called the Salty Seagull, seated near the hearth, nursing a tankard of bitter ale. His face was weather-beaten, his eyes sharp but wary. "Captain Hargrave," Holmes introduced himself, "I am investigating a matter of utmost importance concerning the recent disappearances of merchant vessels." Hargrave's gaze hardened. "Aye, those losses weigh heavy on this town. Men gone without a trace. Some say cursed waters, others foul play." Holmes nodded. "I believe it is the latter. May I ask what you know of Admiral Merrick?" At the name, Hargrave stiffened. "Merrick? A man with a thirst for power that borders on madness. He was stripped of his command years ago after a scandal, rumors of secret experiments and treason." I leaned forward. "Experiments, Captain? What kind?" Hargrave glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "They say he dabbled in the occult, mixing science with darker arts. Some believe he sought to harness the sea itself, to bend it to his will." Holmes exchanged a knowing look with me. "It aligns with what we found at the Siren's hold," he said quietly. Hargrave sighed heavily. "If you want to stop him, you'll need to visit the old Smuggler's Cove near the Lizard Peninsula. There are whispers of a hidden facility there, something Merrick used during his exile." The journey to the Lizard Peninsula was brisk, the rugged coastline dotted with cliffs and coves that seemed carved by giants' hands. Holmes and I rented a modest cart and made our way toward the Smuggler's Cove, a place whispered about in local lore as much for its hidden treasures as for its dangers. The cove was a natural amphitheater of rock and sea, its entrance concealed by overhanging crags and brambles. As we approached, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant crash of waves. Holmes examined the terrain closely. "Notice, Watson, the subtle indentations along the cliff face, marks from hoisting cables and the remnants of old pulley systems. This place was no mere hideout. It was a workshop of considerable scale." He pulled a small device from his pocket, a primitive surveying instrument of his own design, and scanned the rocks. "A hidden entrance here," he muttered, "concealed by an iron door embedded in the cliff. We found it after some searching, a rusted portal secured by a lock corroded from salt and time." Holmes set to work with delicate tools, his nimble fingers coaxing the mechanism to life. With a grating sound, the door swung inward, revealing a descending staircase swallowed by darkness. Torches lit, we descended. The underground chamber was vast, its walls lined with pipes, tanks, and electrical apparatus that hummed faintly with latent energy. Here was a factory of the uncanny, a place where science and madness intertwined. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he explored the room. "These devices," he said, "are designed to generate the same resonance and weather manipulation effects we observed on the Siren's hold. Merrick has replicated his apparatus here, perhaps as a backup or a staging ground for further attacks." I noticed jars of strange substances, bioluminescent fluids and samples of seaweed, as well as blueprints depicting large submarines and armored divers. "Look at this, Holmes," I said, pointing to a diagram. "Mechanical suits," he murmured, tracing the lines with a gloved finger. "Stronger, faster, designed for underwater combat and sabotage." A sudden noise interrupted us, a soft shuffle from the shadows. Holmes drew his revolver. From the darkness emerged a figure, a woman, her face flushed and fierce, holding a knife. "Stand down," she commanded, her eyes blazing. Holmes raised his hands in peace. "We mean no harm. Who are you?" She hesitated, then lowered her weapon. "My name is Margaret Greaves. I was a scientist here, forced to work for Merrick, but I escaped. I can help you stop him." Margaret's tale was harrowing, a story of coercion, espionage, and defiance. She described how Merrick's obsession drove him to recruit brilliant minds under threat or promise, working day and night to perfect his machines. "But Merrick's cruelty knows no bounds," she said. "He experiments on his own men, turning them into these hybrids. The blue crystals you found power them, but they also slowly consume their humanity." Holmes listened intently. "Is there a central command here? A way to disable the network?" Margaret nodded. "There's a main generator chamber further in. Destroy it, and the weather manipulation devices across the coast will fail." Holmes's gaze was unyielding. "Then we must act swiftly." The next hours were a tense and perilous descent deeper into Merrick's lair. We evaded traps and mechanical sentries, guided by Margaret's knowledge of the labyrinthine tunnels. Finally, we reached the generator chamber, a cathedral of humming engines and pulsing crystals. Holmes quickly examined the control panels. The core is stabilized by a series of power conduits. Severing these should collapse the system. But as he prepared to act, a chilling sound filled the chamber, the unmistakable clank of approaching armored suits. "Prepare yourselves, Watson," Holmes said grimly. "We are not alone." The chamber doors burst open, and a squad of Merrick's mechanical warriors entered, their eyes glowing cold and merciless. The squad of mechanical warriors advanced with relentless precision, their steps echoing like thunder within the chamber's vaulted walls. Their eyes, twin orbs of unnatural blue light, swept over us with inhuman calculation. Holmes's revolver gleamed as he steadied his aim, but it was clear that raw firepower alone would not suffice against these monstrosities. "Watson," he barked, "position yourself behind that conduit. These creatures, though formidable, rely heavily on their power source. Strike at their core and they falter." I scrambled behind the metallic pipework, heart hammering. Margaret stood beside me, her expression fierce and unyielding despite the danger. The first of the automatons lunged at Holmes with metallic limbs whirling. With uncanny reflexes, he sidestepped and fired, the bullet striking the creature's chest. It staggered but continued its relentless advance. Another shot shattered a glowing panel on its side, sparks flying. Yet, the creature pressed on. "Watson, now!" Holmes shouted. I seized a heavy wrench from the floor and charged the nearest mechanical soldier. With all my might, I struck its exposed joint. The blue crystal at its core flickered erratically, then dimmed, and the creature collapsed with a grinding metallic groan. Margaret darted forward, pulling a lever that began to sever the power conduits. The hum of the generator faltered, and the automata faltered too, their movements growing sluggish. Holmes capitalized, blasting away with expert precision. One by one, the mechanical soldiers fell, until only silence remained but for the fading thrum of the dying machinery. Breathing heavily, we surveyed the wreckage. "Excellent work, all," Holmes said, though the shadow of worry lingered in his voice. But this victory is but a reprieve. Merrick's reach extends far beyond this lair. Margaret nodded. He has allies and agents embedded in the fleet and government. You must tread carefully. The following days saw us return to London, burdened with the knowledge of Merrick's insidious network. Holmes delved into government records, intercepted communications, and interrogated known associates of the disgraced admiral. One evening, as the gas lamps flickered outside, Holmes revealed a startling discovery. Watson, the mystery deepens. There are signs of a covert syndicate within the Admiralty itself, a cabal of men who stand to gain from Merrick's schemes. I stared in disbelief. You mean to say the conspiracy reaches to the very heart of England's naval power? Holmes nodded gravely. Indeed, and if we are to prevent further calamities, we must expose them before Merrick's ultimate plan comes to fruition. The hunt had only just begun. The gaslight in our Baker Street sitting room cast a wavering glow upon Holmes's sharp features as he studied a spread of telegrams and official papers with unwavering concentration. The room, though modest, bore the marks of his restless intellect. A globe turned askew, chemistry equipment perched precariously on shelves, and a scattering of newspapers marked with cryptic notes. Watson, Holmes began without looking up. The tendrils of Merrick's influence extend deeper than we initially suspected. Our adversary is no lone madman, but a cunning strategist who has cultivated allies within the Admiralty, men driven by ambition and greed. I sank into my chair, the weight of his words pressing upon me like the fog outside. Do we have names, Holmes? Or at least leads to follow? Holmes tapped a telegram, its official seal stark against the stained paper. This dispatch, ostensibly routine, hints at secret meetings aboard the HMS Invincible, a vessel recently involved in covert operations along the Channel. The dates coincide suspiciously with the disappearances. Leaning forward, I asked, then our next step must be to infiltrate this circle, gather proof. Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. Precisely, Watson. We must tread carefully. These are men skilled in deceit and perilous in their resolve. Our investigation soon led us to a smoky club nestled in the heart of London's West End, a place where whispers carried weight and allegiances were forged in shadows. Holmes, ever the master of disguise, assumed the guise of a disenchanted naval officer, while I accompanied him as a companion seeking passage to a better life. Inside, the club hummed with low conversation and the clinking of glasses. At a corner table sat a group of men whose bearing and attire marked them as officers of considerable rank. Among them was Commodore Sinclair, a man whose cold eyes belied a ruthlessness we had come to associate with Merrick's network. Holmes approached with measured confidence. "Gentlemen," he began, voice smooth and ingratiating, "I hear talk of a secret project, something to tip the scales in England's favor against her rivals." Sinclair's eyes narrowed. "And who might you be to inquire about such matters?" "A concerned patriot," Holmes replied, "a man who sees the sea as England's lifeblood and wishes to ensure its security." The conversation that followed was a dangerous dance of insinuations and half-truths, with Holmes skillfully probing for cracks in their carefully constructed facade. Back at Baker Street, the clues began to align. Ciphers hidden within naval dispatches revealed a pattern of encrypted messages, coordinates and dates that matched reported sightings of the unnatural fogs and attacks. Holmes's mind raced as he pieced together the puzzle. Merrick is preparing a final offensive. Watson, a coordinated strike on multiple ports using his weather manipulation devices. I shuddered. The cost in lives would be catastrophic. Holmes's gaze hardened. Which is why we must act swiftly. Tomorrow, we set sail for Portsmouth, where the largest concentration of merchant vessels awaits. If Merrick's forces strike there, we may be the last line of defense. As night settled over London, I found myself pondering the scope of the conspiracy, the cruel ingenuity of a man who bent the forces of nature to his will, and the shadowy men who enabled him. The line between patriot and traitor blurred in the mist. Holmes, ever restless, prepared for the coming battle with a grim resolve. "We are on the precipice of war, Watson," he said quietly. "A war fought not with guns alone, but with fog and storm and steel." And with that, the die was cast. The dawn broke cold and gray as we boarded the HMS Vanguard at Portsmouth Harbor, its masts towering against the somber sky like sentinels guarding the fragile peace. The fleet was assembled in grim anticipation, merchant ships bobbing alongside warships, their crews weary but vigilant. Rumors of Merrick's impending strike had spread like wildfire, casting a pall over the bustling port. Holmes and I secured passage as naval consultants, our presence a subtle defiance against the unknown menace lurking beyond the horizon. As the Vanguard slipped from the dock, a heavy fog began to creep over the water, dense and unnatural. The sea itself seemed to shudder under the weight of the mist. Holmes stood at the prow, his eyes piercing the haze. "Watson," he murmured, "this is no ordinary fog. It bears the unmistakable signature of Merrick's machines, engineered to disorient and doom any ship caught within." Suddenly, the shrill cry of the lookout pierced the morning air. "Ship off the starboard bow! Approaching fast through the fog!" Holmes sprang into action, barking orders to the crew. The fog thickened, swallowing the silhouette of a strange vessel, a sleek, black craft moving with unnatural speed. An attack craft, Holmes deduced, designed for swift sabotage. Before we could react further, the fog pulsed with an eerie blue light, and from its depths emerged Merrick's mechanized soldiers, their eyes blazing with unholy fire. The battle erupted, a clash of steel, steam, and gunpowder. Holmes led a squadron of sailors armed with rifles and cutlasses, engaging the mechanical monstrosities with grim determination. I found myself locked in combat with one such automaton. Its metallic claws struck with the force of a battering ram, but I managed to parry and deliver a crushing blow with my sword to its power core. The creature collapsed in a shower of sparks. Amidst the chaos, Holmes fought with relentless precision, exploiting every weakness, rallying the men with shouts that cut through the fog. But Merrick's forces were many, and the tide of battle threatened to overwhelm us. In the midst of the melee, a sudden explosion rocked the Vanguard, sending shards of wood and iron flying. Flames licked hungrily at the rigging as the ship listed dangerously. "Holmes," I shouted, "we must evacuate the wounded and fall back to shore." "No," he replied fiercely, "we cannot abandon the fleet now. Merrick's plan hinges on fear and confusion. If we hold firm, we break his hold." With grim resolve, we continued the fight, the fog swirling like a living entity around us. Hours passed like moments, until finally the first rays of sun pierced the mist, dissolving Merrick's fog and revealing the battered but unbroken fleet. Merrick's attack had been repelled, but the cost was grave. Ships sunk, lives lost, and the shadow of his menace still looming. As the survivors gathered on the docks, Holmes and I shared a quiet moment. "This war is far from over, Watson," he said quietly. "But today, we have proven that even the darkest fog can be pierced by courage and resolve." I nodded, the weight of the day heavy upon my shoulders but tempered by hope. For in the heart of the tempest, the human spirit shines brightest. Chapter 6, Whispers Beneath the Surface. The events at Portsmouth weighed heavily upon us as the dusk settled across London like a silken shroud. The streets, slick with a recent rain, glistened beneath the flicker of gas lamps. Their steady glow cast long shadows that seemed to dance with secrets. Though the fleet had survived Merrick's assault, it was but a single battle in a war whose full scope remained cloaked in mystery. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes and I convened by the fire, the hearth crackling softly as rain pattered against the windowpane. The air was thick with tobacco smoke, and the scent of ink-stained papers strewn across the desk. Holmes, ever restless, was poring over a bundle of intercepted letters and telegrams, muttering fragments of code and cipher under his breath. "I cannot shake the feeling, Watson," he said, finally looking up with those piercing eyes aflame with intensity, "that Merrick's true design extends beyond mere disruption of our merchant vessels. He is playing a deeper game, one which threatens not just the sea lanes, but the very heart of our empire's power. I settled into my chair, watching the flicker of his silhouette against the glowing embers. Do you mean to suggest a political conspiracy? Holmes nodded slowly. Indeed, our latest intelligence suggests Merrick has allies in high places, men who benefit from chaos, who wish to profit from the ensuing panic and control the flow of commerce themselves. The question is, who? The next morning, Holmes and I set out for the Admiralty, an imposing edifice of stone and iron that rose like a fortress overlooking the Thames. The bustle of clerks and officers moving briskly about their duties was a stark reminder of the machinery of government. Vast, intricate, and often impenetrable. Holmes had secured an audience with a trusted contact, Captain Frederick Langston, a man known for his integrity and willingness to assist in matters that lurked in the shadows. In a quiet office lined with maritime charts and nautical instruments, Langston greeted us with a firm handshake. "Holmes, Watson," he said gravely, "the situation grows more precarious by the day. Merrick's tactics are unlike any we've faced. His use of artificial fog and mechanical soldiers is unprecedented, but more troubling are the hints of treason within our ranks." Holmes leaned forward. "Captain, what can you tell us about these traitors? Who are the men pulling strings behind the curtain?" Langston hesitated, then spoke in a lowered tone. "There is talk of a clandestine council, a group known only as the Order of the Crimson Anchor. They operate with ruthless efficiency, infiltrating the highest echelons of the Navy and commerce alike. Their aim is control of England's maritime trade through any means necessary." I frowned. "The Order of the Crimson Anchor? Have we encountered any of their agents?" Langston's eyes darkened. "Not directly, but their influence is felt in obscure telegrams, unexplained shifts in fleet movements, and sudden changes in shipping routes. They use Merrick as a pawn, but his fanaticism may yet be his undoing." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Then our task is twofold: dismantle Merrick's network and unmask the Order before they tighten their grip." That evening, Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, where the city's heartbeat seemed to quicken as the fog crept once again over the Thames. A letter awaited me. No seal, no signature, simply an address: the Old Mariners' Chapel, Docklands. Holmes examined the missive with furrowed brow. A summons or a trap, perhaps. But I inclined toward the former. The chapel is a forgotten relic, frequented by those who navigate the margins of law and loyalty. We must investigate, Watson. Under the cloak of night, we took to the streets, the gas lamps casting eerie halos in the mist as we made our way to the Docklands. The chapel stood in solemn silence, its spire reaching like a finger accusing the sky. Inside, the air was thick with incense and whispers of old sea songs. We were met by a gaunt figure, a man named Elias Drummond, a retired sea captain known for his knowledge of maritime lore and clandestine gatherings. "Welcome, gentlemen," he said in a voice cracked with age and salt. "You seek the truth behind the vanishings, do you not?" Holmes inclined his head. "Indeed, Captain, and any knowledge you can offer of the Order or Merrick's plans will be invaluable." Drummond's eyes glittered. "Beware, for what you seek is deeper than simple malice. The sea itself stirs with ancient forces, and men's greed has summoned a tempest that will drown us all if left unchecked." That night, Holmes and I pored over Drummond's recollections, mapping connections between the Order's rumored members, Merrick's movements, and unexplained phenomena along the coast. A pattern emerged, one that pointed toward a long-abandoned naval station on the Isle of Wight, a place shrouded in rumor and decay, and whispered to be Merrick's final stronghold. "Tomorrow, Watson," Holmes said as dawn threatened the horizon, "we embark on what may be our most perilous journey yet. To the Isle of Wight, where the shadows grow longest and the truth waits beneath the waves." The morning sun rose timidly through a veil of mist as Holmes and I boarded the steam ferry bound for the Isle of Wight. The Thames had given way to the choppier waters of the Solent, its waves whispering tales of sailors lost and secrets submerged beneath the restless sea. Around us, the hustle of trade and passage slowly dwindled, replaced by the muted solemnity of a land largely forgotten. Holmes stood at the prow, his coat billowing in the salt wind. "Watson, do you feel it? The weight of centuries here, the silent witness of war, of men who dared to command the very elements." I nodded, the chill in the air reminding me of the stakes we faced. "The Isle is more than a place. It is a crucible, and soon it may decide the fate of all our shores. Our arrival was greeted by a peculiar silence. The ferry docked at Yarmouth, a small fishing town that seemed suspended in time. Weathered fishermen mended nets and eyed us curiously, their faces etched with salt and hardship. Holmes wasted no time in seeking out the station of the Coast Guard, a weathered outpost perched upon the cliffs. There, he hoped, lay the final clues to Merrick's hidden base. Inside the cramped quarters, we met Lieutenant James Carow, a stern man with eyes like flint. "You're the men asking after strange happenings," Carow said gruffly. "Ships vanishing, fog thicker than a London fog, strange lights in the dead of night." Holmes leaned in. "You've seen such things yourself?" Carow nodded. "Aye. Just last week, a schooner disappeared right off these rocks. No distress signal, no wreckage, nothing. The fog rolled in, thick and unnatural, and when it cleared, she was gone as if swallowed by the sea." "Any witnesses?" I asked. "Only a handful of fishermen," he replied, voice low. "But they're too frightened to speak. There's talk of ghosts and curses, but I don't put much stock in superstition." Holmes studied the man. "What of the abandoned naval station to the south? Fort St. Clair? It's said to be deserted, yet there are reports of lights and movement." Carow's jaw tightened. "I advise you stay clear. That place is no good, and the locals say it's haunted by the sins of the past." That evening, as twilight bled into night, Holmes and I made our way toward Fort St. Clair, a crumbling fortress nestled among wild cliffs and tangled brambles. The path was treacherous, the wind carrying a mournful howl, as if warning us back. The fort's walls rose like jagged teeth against the darkening sky, their stones slick with moss and sea spray. Holmes produced a lantern, its flickering flame casting long shadows that danced like specters along the battlements. "Watson, the architecture here betrays more than mere abandonment. See these reinforced beams and the curious absence of decay near the eastern tower? Someone has been here recently." As we stepped inside, the silence was broken by a faint humming, a mechanical drone resonating deep within the stone corridors. Holmes's keen eyes detected a concealed door, cleverly hidden behind a tapestry depicting a naval battle. With deft hands, he manipulated the mechanism, and the wall slid open to reveal a narrow stairwell spiraling downward into darkness. "I suspect Merrick's lair lies beneath this fortress," Holmes whispered. "Prepare yourself, Watson. We are about to confront the heart of the storm." The descent was slow and treacherous. Damp walls closed around us, the air growing colder and thick with the scent of oil and machinery. The faint drone grew louder until it became a mechanical heartbeat, a terrible symphony of gears and steam. At the base of the stairwell, we emerged into a cavernous chamber, illuminated by eerie green light, emanating from strange crystalline devices. Walls were lined with pipes and levers, and at the center stood a colossal machine, a monstrous contraption that churned and hissed, manipulating jets of steam and swirling clouds within its core. Holmes approached cautiously, inspecting a series of gauges and inscriptions etched into brass plates. "This, Watson, is Merrick's weather engine, the very instrument he uses to conjure the deadly fogs that have plagued our coasts. With this device, he wields the power of tempest and tide alike." Suddenly, a voice rang out, cold and triumphant. "Bravo, Mr. Holmes! I had hoped you would find me." From the shadows stepped a tall figure cloaked in naval regalia, his face a mask of both fury and bitter resolve. The very embodiment of the man we had sought, Admiral Horace Merrick. His eyes gleamed with a cruel fire as he surveyed us. "You have been persistent, I grant you that, but persistence will not save you from the fate I have prepared." Holmes squared his shoulders. "Your vendetta has wrought devastation enough, Merrick. Surrender now, and justice will be tempered with mercy." Merrick laughed, a harsh sound echoing off the stone. "Mercy? No, Mr. Holmes. I seek to rewrite the balance of power, to punish those who betrayed their nation and exalt those who dare seize destiny. England's merchant fleet will burn, and from the ashes, a new order shall rise." With a swift motion, Merrick signaled. Mechanical soldiers emerged from concealed alcoves, their eyes glowing with lethal intent. Holmes and I drew our weapons, bracing for the final battle. The clash that followed was a maelstrom of steel, steam, and thunderous determination. The mechanical soldiers advanced, relentless and precise. But Holmes's strategy and quick firing kept us one step ahead. I found myself locked in fierce combat, dodging crushing blows and delivering desperate strikes to the creature's vulnerable joints. Holmes, ever the tactician, targeted the machinery powering the weather engine, seeking to cripple Merrick's weapon of devastation. Amidst the chaos, Merrick moved with lethal grace, determined to see his plan fulfilled. But as Holmes smashed a vital control panel, the machine shuddered and began to falter. The ominous hum faded, replaced by an unnatural silence. Realizing defeat, Merrick's expression twisted with rage and despair. "Curse you, Holmes!" he spat. "This is not the end." With Merrick subdued and his weather engine disabled, Holmes and I emerged from the fortress, battered but victorious. The dawn painted the sky with hues of gold and rose, promising a fragile hope for England's shores. As we made our way back to London, I could not help but marvel at the depths of human ambition and the indomitable spirit of those who dare to fight for justice. Holmes, silent but resolute, simply said, "The sea will calm for now, Watson, but the puzzle remains incomplete. There are still shadows we must illuminate." Chapter 7. Echoes of the Past. The streets of London were cloaked in an uneasy quiet when Holmes and I returned from the Isle of Wight. The city's familiar gas lamps flickered through a thin, creeping fog, casting distorted shadows that seemed to pulse with a restless energy. Though Merrick's immediate threat had been quelled, the tremors of his scheme still echoed in the corridors of power and the whispered conversations of those who lived in fear. We found 221B Baker Street just as the night deepened, the familiar room redolent with the scents of pipe tobacco, leather-bound volumes, and the lingering tang of sea air from our recent journey. Holmes was uncharacteristically pensive, his gaze distant as he sifted through the notebooks and documents we had collected. I took a seat by the fire, letting the warmth seep into my chilled bones. "Holmes," I ventured cautiously, "do you believe Merrick acted alone in his grand design? Or were there others orchestrating these vanishings from the shadows?" Holmes looked up, the keen light of his eyes rekindling. "A most pertinent question, Watson. The Admiral was but one actor in a far more intricate play. His weather engine and mechanized soldiers were instruments, but the strings were pulled by hands we have yet to identify. The Order of the Crimson Anchor remains an enigma, a hydra with many heads, each more dangerous than the last." I sighed, the weight of the unsolved mysteries pressing down. "And these heads, do we have any inkling of who they might be?" Holmes rose, pacing the length of the room. "There are names whispered in secret, men of wealth, influence, and ambition, lords who sit in Parliament, merchants who trade in shadows, and naval officers corrupted by greed or grievance. Our challenge is to unmask them, to unravel the network that allows Merrick's vision to fester and spread." The following day, Holmes's restless energy was matched only by his determination. We set out for the heart of London's mercantile district, where the scent of salt and spice mingled with the clang of dock workers and the calls of hawkers. Holmes's plan was to infiltrate a clandestine auction rumored to be a gathering place for members of the Crimson Anchor, a market for stolen goods, secrets, and alliances forged in the dark. Disguised in modest attire and adopting the guise of foreign investors, we mingled among a motley crowd of sailors, merchants, and men whose eyes glittered with the promise of profit. The auction was held in a cavernous warehouse near the docks, its walls adorned with faded naval flags and crates stamped with cryptic insignia. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and suspicion. Holmes leaned toward me and whispered, "Observe carefully, Watson. Among these faces lie the answers we seek." As the auctioneer began his chant, presenting a collection of exotic artifacts and documents, Holmes's sharp gaze settled on a particular figure, a tall, impeccably dressed man with silver hair and an air of cold calculation. "That, my friend," Holmes murmured, "is Lord Percival Hargrave, a man with more influence than his modest appearance suggests." Hargrave's eyes swept the room with predatory precision, lingering momentarily on our corner before turning away. Holmes's expression hardened. "He is a known member of the Order," Holmes whispered, "and we have stumbled upon a nest of vipers." As the bidding escalated, Holmes and I maneuvered through the crowd, listening to hushed conversations and deciphering coded exchanges. We learned of shipments rerouted through shadow ports, secret contracts for mercenaries, and plans to sabotage key naval installations. The web of intrigue was vast and tangled, its threads reaching far beyond anything we had imagined. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A group of men barged in, their faces obscured by scarves and hats. The auction house fell into chaos as weapons were drawn and shouts filled the air. Holmes reacted instantly, grabbing my arm. "We must retreat, now!" We dashed through the labyrinth of crates and barrels, narrowly evading a hail of bullets and grappling with assailants intent on silencing us. Bursting into the fog-choked street, we vanished into the maze of alleys, hearts pounding, minds racing. Back at Baker Street, as the adrenaline ebbed, Holmes pieced together what we had overheard. "The Order is preparing a final gambit, Watson," he said grimly. "They seek to cripple England's naval power, not merely through Merrick's machines, but by igniting rebellion within the fleet itself." I shook my head in disbelief. Such treachery! The consequences would be disastrous. Holmes's gaze was steely, which is why we must act swiftly and with cunning. The weeks that followed our narrow escape from the auction were marked by restless nights and ceaseless inquiry. London seemed to close in upon us with its usual fog, but now that pallor carried a new menace, a weight of secrets waiting to suffocate the unwary. Merrick's weather engine lay dismantled beneath the Isle of Wight's ancient fortress, yet the ripple effects of his ambition were far from spent. Holmes, ever vigilant, shifted our focus toward unmasking the members of the Crimson Anchor who sought to destabilize the empire from within. Their tendrils were subtle, hidden beneath layers of respectability, but Holmes's instinct for detail proved relentless. "Watson," he said one evening as we sat by the fire, the flicker of candlelight reflecting in his hawk-like eyes, "our greatest challenge is that we face not merely a single foe, but a coalition of men who blend the elegance of high society with the ruthlessness of the underworld. They trade in influence, in whispers, in veiled threats, and they operate under the very noses of those sworn to protect the realm." I nodded, keenly aware that the stakes had escalated beyond anything we had yet confronted. "Have you identified any new leads?" Holmes tapped a folded sheet of paper on the table. "A letter intercepted from the office of one Lord Percival Hargrave, our acquaintance from the auction. It contains cryptic references to the coming tempest and the Shadow Fleet. I suspect a secret rendezvous is planned within the dock's labyrinth. We must be there." The docks at night presented a labyrinthine maze of warehouses, cranes, and cargo ships creaking against their moorings. The salty breeze carried the distant cries of seagulls and the muffled thump of hidden engines. Holmes and I, cloaked in the anonymity of darkness, slipped through the shadows toward a secluded quay known as Blackwater Pier. Here, amid rusting chains and crates marked with obscure sigils, the secret council of the Crimson Anchor was said to convene. As we approached, a low murmur of voices drifted on the breeze. Holmes held up a finger, signaling me to remain silent. Peering around a corner, we observed a group gathered beneath a lantern's dim glow, men in the uniforms of naval officers, prominent merchants, and a few shadowy figures cloaked in civilian garb. At their center, Lord Hargrave presided with imperious authority. Holmes's whisper was taut with urgency. "There lies our quarry, Watson. Observe carefully." The men spoke in clipped tones, their conversation laced with references to disrupting supply chains, leveraging mercenary fleets, and accelerating the fog's deployment. One figure, a sharp-featured man with a scar tracing his jawline, spoke with venomous resolve. "Once the fleet falters, the merchant routes will be ours to command. The Admiralty's loyalty is fractured. We must exploit every fissure." Hargrave's voice was calm but ruthless. "Ensure the weather machines remain operational. Merrick's failure was a setback, but not the end. Our engineers have devised enhancements, more potent, more lethal. We will bring England to her knees beneath a shroud of impenetrable fog." We remained hidden, listening intently as the conspirators laid bare their strategy, a diabolical scheme to cripple England's naval supremacy and monopolize maritime trade through fear and sabotage. Holmes's jaw tightened. "This is treason of the highest order. We must bring this to the Admiralty immediately." Yet, as we prepared to withdraw, a sudden noise betrayed our presence. A sharp crack, the scrape of boots against cobblestone. The men turned, eyes sharp and weapons drawn. After them! Hargrave barked, his face twisting with fury. Holmes grabbed my arm, and we sprinted into the tangled warren of docks and alleys, the chase swift and merciless. Gunshots echoed behind us, mingling with the shouts of pursuers and the crash of crates toppled in our flight. Twisting through narrow passageways, we sought refuge in an abandoned warehouse, its interior cluttered with forgotten barrels and rotting ropes. Holmes barred the door and pressed his ear against the wood. "They are closing in, Watson," he said grimly. "We must hold our ground." In the tense moments that followed, I could hear the heavy breathing of our attackers, their footsteps methodical as they surrounded the building. Holmes examined the warehouse, noting the unstable stacks of cargo and a small window barred with rusted iron. "There," he pointed. "We escape through the loft. Climb swiftly." We scrambled upward, the wooden beams creaking beneath our weight as bullets thudded into the walls below. Emerging onto the roof, the cold night air bit at our faces as we crouched behind chimney stacks. Below, the conspirators cursed their lost prey, their voices fading as they searched the wrong paths. Holmes exhaled slowly, his face a mask of steely resolve. "We have uncovered the heart of the conspiracy, but we are far from victory. The Order of the Crimson Anchor is vast and shadowed. To defeat them, we must illuminate their darkest corners." In the following days, our investigations led us through the tangled webs of London's political salons, the dim backrooms of merchant guilds, and the secretive clubs where the elite gathered to plot and scheme. Holmes's uncanny skill in reading men's motives and deciphering codes was our greatest weapon. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at 221B, a young woman, elegantly dressed but bearing an air of quiet desperation. She introduced herself as Miss Evelyn Carow, niece to Lieutenant James Carow from the Isle of Wight. Her story was chilling. "My uncle vanished days after your departure," she said, voice trembling. "He discovered evidence of a deeper plot within the Navy, men plotting to betray their country. Before he disappeared, he entrusted me with these." She handed Holmes a small bundle of papers, letters, maps, and coded messages. Holmes examined them closely, his brow furrowed. Lieutenant Carow was silenced because he threatened to expose the order's reach within the Admiralty. These documents implicate several high-ranking officers and merchants colluding to sabotage our naval defenses. That night, as the fog rolled thick across London, Holmes and I sat once more by the fire, the weight of our discoveries pressing heavily upon us. "We are engaged in a war not only of men, but of ideas, loyalties, and shadows," Holmes mused. "To protect the realm, we must dismantle the order piece by piece." I gazed into the flickering flames, knowing the road ahead would be perilous. And Merrick's schemes? Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet certainty. "A symptom of a greater malaise, but every empire has its enemies, Watson. It is our duty to unmask them, whatever the cost." Chapter 8, The Web Tightens. The fog hung thick over London like a shroud, the gas lamps casting pale halos through the damp air as Holmes and I resumed our tireless search for answers. The shadows that clung to the city seemed darker now, heavy with the whispers of treachery and the echoes of vanished ships. The Order of the Crimson Anchor, with its tentacles reaching into the highest echelons of power, was tightening its grip, and it was clear that every moment counted. Our first priority was to follow the trail left by Lieutenant James Carow, whose disappearance had cast a pall over the Isle of Wight, and, more disturbingly, suggested that the Order's influence had penetrated deep into the Royal Navy itself. His niece, Miss Evelyn Carow, had placed her trust in us, and Holmes was resolute in uncovering the truth that had cost her uncle his life. The morning was bitterly cold when we set out for the Admiralty Archives, a fortress of parchment and ink nestled in the heart of Whitehall. The grandeur of the building belied the labyrinthine complexity of its records, volumes upon volumes of ship logs, personnel files, and coded communications. Holmes was like a bloodhound in this environment, his eyes scanning pages, his fingers tracing cryptic markings that might escape any but the most astute observer. "Watson," he said quietly, "the evidence we have gathered suggests that the Order's agents are embedded within the Naval Command. We must identify who is issuing orders that sabotage fleet operations under the guise of routine maneuvering." Hours turned into day as we pored over documents, and it was late afternoon when Holmes's discovery struck a spark of hope. "Here," he whispered, pointing to a series of dispatches signed only by the initials MB. "These orders correspond with the timing of the disappearances. The handwriting matches that found in Lieutenant Caro's secret letters." Our next move was clear. We needed to uncover the identity of MB, a shadowy figure whose directives had orchestrated the most devastating blows to England's merchant fleet. Holmes's deduction skills were put to the test as we cross-referenced names and ranks until a pattern emerged. "Major Basil Mortimer," Holmes announced, "a decorated officer with access to strategic naval operations. His sudden rise through the ranks is suspicious, as is his proximity to Lord Hargrave. I believe Mortimer is the linchpin holding the Order's military influence together." The next challenge was to approach Mortimer without alerting the Order. Holmes's plan was meticulous. We would infiltrate an exclusive gentlemen's club frequented by military officers and politicians, a place where Mortimer was rumored to be a regular. The club was a grand establishment of polished wood and leather-bound books, where the air was thick with cigar smoke and quiet confidences. Holmes and I entered under the guise of interested observers, blending seamlessly with the elegant crowd. We found a secluded corner and waited for our mark. Soon, a tall, imposing man entered, his uniform immaculate, his bearing that of a man accustomed to command. Basil Mortimer's eyes swept the room before settling on a table where a small gathering of officers and gentlemen were engaged in animated discussion. Holmes whispered, "Watch closely, Watson. The dance of politics and deception is as subtle here as in any battlefield." Over the next several hours, we observed Mortimer deftly weaving between his associates, his voice low but authoritative. He spoke of upcoming naval exercises, the shifting tides of international alliances, and the importance of maintaining secrecy. Our moment came unexpectedly. Mortimer excused himself from the group and approached the bar, where Holmes feigned a casual spill of his drink. Mortimer helped clean the mess, and the brief interaction gave Holmes the opening he needed to engage. "Major Mortimer," Holmes began smoothly, "a pleasure to meet a man of such distinguished reputation. I am investigating certain irregularities in naval operations and hoped you might shed some light." Mortimer's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across his face. "I do not take kindly to insinuations, Mr. Holmes?" "Sherlock Holmes," I interjected. Mortimer gave a curt nod. "Mr. Holmes, I assure you, my loyalty is to Her Majesty and the Crown. If you have evidence to the contrary, I suggest you tread carefully." Holmes smiled thinly. "Caution is wise, but truth must prevail. Tell me, Major, what do you make of the recent disappearances off the coast? Surely you have concerns." Mortimer's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Maritime operations are fraught with danger. The sea is a merciless adversary. Any losses are regrettable, but not necessarily the result of sabotage." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Yet some ships report fog so unnatural they defy meteorological explanation." Mortimer's eyes flickered with something unspoken. But before he could reply, a sudden commotion erupted near the club entrance. A figure burst into the room. A young messenger, breathless and wide-eyed. "Major Mortimer, urgent dispatch from the Admiralty. Your presence is requested immediately." Mortimer's face hardened as he tore open the message. "Excuse me, gentlemen. Duty calls." As he strode out, Holmes and I exchanged glances. "We must follow," Holmes said, "and learn where this summons leads." The message had directed Mortimer to a secret naval facility on the Thames, one we had not yet investigated, a site known only to a select few as the Black Harbor dockyards. The docks were a maze of warehouses, dry docks, and shadowed quays, where ships were repaired and refitted under strict confidentiality. Under cover of darkness, Holmes and I made our way to Black Harbor, evading sentries and slipping past guarded gates. The air was heavy with the scent of tar, salt, and steam, punctuated by the rhythmic pounding of hammers and the hiss of welding torches. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he surveyed the scene. "Watson, this is no ordinary dockyard. Look there. The presence of armored vehicles and what appears to be a weather control apparatus, far more sophisticated than anything we have seen." Suddenly, a voice rang out behind us. "Going somewhere, gentlemen?" We turned to find Mortimer himself, flanked by two burly men. His expression was cold, unreadable. "You've been meddling where you ought not, Mr. Holmes," Mortimer said smoothly. "But I admire your tenacity. Perhaps you would like to join us. Serve the order properly." Holmes's voice was calm but resolute. "I serve only justice and the truth, Major. Your games end here." Mortimer smiled thinly. "We shall see." What followed was a tense confrontation, a duel of wits and wills beneath the shadow of the great ironclads. Mortimer revealed fragments of the order's grand design, plans to unleash a devastating storm upon England's eastern ports using enhanced weather machinery, crippling the fleet and plunging the nation into chaos. Holmes, ever resourceful, signaled silently, and with precise timing, a contingent of loyal naval officers and constables, alerted by our earlier communications, descended upon the dockyard. Caught off guard, Mortimer's men surrendered, and the Major himself was taken into custody, his face a mask of bitter defeat. As dawn broke over the Thames, I stood beside Holmes watching the first light glint on the water. "The web is vast, Watson," Holmes said quietly. "We have captured one spider, but many remain weaving their plots." I nodded, the weight of the battle ahead pressing heavily. Yet with each victory, the light grows stronger. Holmes's gaze was steady. "Indeed, my friend, and we shall see this mystery through to its final inevitable end." Chapter 9. The Island of Secrets. The arrest of Major Basil Mortimer dealt a significant blow to the Order of the Crimson Anchor, yet Holmes and I both knew the battle was far from over. Mortimer had been but one thread in a vast tapestry of deceit, and his capture only served to unveil darker and more dangerous layers beneath. The days following the raid on Black Harbor dockyards were filled with interrogations and the careful sifting of documents and maps recovered from Mortimer's quarters. Holmes pored over these tirelessly, his sharp mind deciphering coded passages and piecing together clues that hinted at the location of the Order's central command. A hidden base, where Merrick's weather technology was being perfected and where the next phase of the sinister plan was to be launched. It was during one of these late-night sessions, the glow of a single candle flickering over a spread of maps and nautical charts, that Holmes's finger traced a cluster of islands off the southern coast, nearly invisible to all but the most discerning eye. "Here, Watson," he said quietly, "the Isles of Rookhaven. A remote, nearly forgotten chain shrouded in mist and superstition. Perfect for concealment." I leaned closer, noting the jagged outline of the islands, their treacherous waters infamous among sailors for sudden storms and disappearing vessels. Holmes's eyes gleamed. The perfect lair for a mastermind such as Merrick or Hargrave. Our preparations to investigate Rookhaven were meticulous. We secured passage aboard a small steam yacht, the Sea Wind, owned by a trusted friend of Holmes's, Captain Eliza Harrow, a formidable woman whose command of the seas rivaled any naval officer. As we boarded at dawn, the harbor bustled with activity. The salty tang of seaweed and tar mingled with the cries of gulls and the rhythmic pounding of steam engines. Holmes introduced me to Captain Harrow, whose steely gaze and no-nonsense manner instantly inspired confidence. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she greeted, her voice firm but cordial. "The waters around Rookhaven are as unforgiving as the legends say. We must be vigilant." The journey to Rookhaven was both treacherous and exhilarating. Thick fog clung to the waves like a living thing, reducing visibility to mere yards. The sea roared and hissed, the yacht pitching violently in the rolling swells. Holmes spent hours on deck, his gaze fixed on the horizon, occasionally consulting a sextant and compass, while I documented the voyage, the tension mounting with every mile. On the third day, as we approached the outermost isle, the fog suddenly parted, revealing a rocky coastline crowned by a fortress-like structure, an imposing citadel of stone, steel, and glass, its spires rising defiantly against the gray sky. "There," Holmes murmured, "the heart of the Order's operations." Our landing was covert. We slipped ashore under cover of dusk, navigating the island's jagged cliffs and dense undergrowth. The air was thick with the scent of brine and decay, mingled with an undercurrent of smoke and machinery. As we neared the fortress, hidden sentries spotted us, their alarm calls echoing through the stone corridors. A desperate chase ensued through shadowed tunnels and vaulted chambers, the clang of footsteps and shouts reverberating around us. Holmes's plan was brilliant. We used the labyrinthine layout of the fortress to our advantage, slipping through secret passages and hidden doors he had marked on the stolen blueprints recovered from Mortimer's documents. Inside the Citadel, we discovered the full horror of the Order's ambition. Chambers filled with humming machines designed to manipulate the weather, enormous generators that crackled with electrical energy, and rooms cluttered with maps plotting storm paths and naval movements. We came upon a laboratory where Merrick's journal lay open, entries revealing experiments in fog generation, electrical storms, and atmospheric control far beyond contemporary science. Holmes studied the pages intently. "This confirms it, Watson. The Order has been harnessing technology that could rival nature itself. But our intrusion did not go unnoticed. As we moved deeper into the fortress, alarms blared, and the Order's guards swarmed like angry hornets. A fierce battle erupted in the cavernous main hall. Holmes fought with surprising ferocity, his fists and wits as sharp as ever, while I found myself forced to rely on my medical training and steadiness under pressure to fend off attacks. During the chaos, a figure appeared on the balcony above, the mastermind behind it all, Admiral Reginald Hargrave, Lord Percival's estranged brother and a disgraced naval officer whose bitterness and vendetta had driven him to orchestrate the vanishings. Hargrave's voice was cold and commanding. "You should have stayed away, Holmes. England's fleet is mine to break." Holmes replied with calm defiance. "Your hatred blinds you, Admiral, but your reign of terror ends here." A tense standoff ensued, the fortress trembling with the hum of machinery preparing to unleash a catastrophic storm. Holmes and I exchanged a glance, knowing the final confrontation was imminent. Hargrave stood on the balcony above the main hall, his sharp silhouette outlined by the flickering light of arcane machinery behind him. His eyes gleamed with a chilling combination of pride and rancor. "You think you can undo what I have set in motion? The Navy has ignored me, forgotten me. They left me to rot after I exposed the corruption of their precious merchant fleet," he spat, voice echoing coldly through the chamber. "These vanishings? My revenge against the complacent, the arrogant." Holmes, his expression calm yet fierce, stepped forward. "Revenge at the cost of innocent lives, Admiral. You have gambled with the fate of a nation and lost your own humanity in the process." Hargrave smiled bitterly. "Humanity is a luxury in war, Mr. Holmes. I am merely a necessary evil, a reckoning. And now the storm I have engineered will drown England's pride beneath waves of chaos and despair." He gestured, and the massive machine behind him roared to life. Blue arcs of electricity crackled in the air, gauges spun wildly, and a low, throbbing hum filled the chamber. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "An artificial tempest. Your fog machines and weather controllers combine to weaponize the sea itself. But even your brilliance cannot outwit nature's fury for long." As alarms wailed and red lights bathed the room, Holmes and I exchanged a quick glance. "Watson, the key to stopping this storm lies in that control panel," Holmes said urgently. "If we can disable the generators, we might yet prevent disaster." We sprang into action, dodging guards as they poured into the hall. Holmes expertly dismantled the control panel with swift precision, wires sparking as he severed crucial connections. Meanwhile, I used my revolver sparingly, firing warning shots to keep the attackers at bay. Hargrave, enraged, descended into the fray, his naval sword flashing dangerously close. Holmes parried, their battle a deadly dance amid the chaos. "You underestimate me, Holmes," Hargrave snarled. "I have prepared for this moment far longer than you imagine." But Holmes was relentless. Using quick thinking, he maneuvered Hargrave toward the machinery's core, where a malfunctioning coil erupted in a burst of sparks. Hargrave stumbled, giving Holmes the opportunity to land a decisive blow that sent the Admiral crashing to the ground, unconscious. With Hargrave incapacitated, Holmes returned to the controls. "The storm will dissipate now, Watson," he said, twisting the final switch. The hum ceased, and the ominous machinery fell silent. Outside, the heavy fog that had been advancing over the island began to lift, revealing the stars once more. In the aftermath, with Hargrave in custody and the Order's base exposed, the mystery of the vanishing ships was finally unraveled. The survivors, once mute with terror, began to speak, recounting harrowing tales of unnatural fogs and spectral lights that had lured them to destruction. Holmes and I stood together on the deck of the Sea Wind as we sailed back toward London, the first light of dawn gilding the horizon. "Another case closed, but not without cost," I murmured. Holmes's gaze was thoughtful. "Indeed, Watson. Yet every shadow we dispel brings us closer to the light. The seas are safer now, and England's future a little more secure." Chapter X: The Storm's End. The long voyage back from Rookhaven passed in uneasy silence. Though the artificial tempest had been quelled and Admiral Hargrave apprehended, the weight of recent events pressed heavily on us both. The sea, once an untamable force of nature, had been weaponized by human hands, and the consequences of such hubris echoed ominously in my mind. Holmes, for his part, was as restless as ever, pacing the deck of the Sea Wind, beneath a sky slowly clearing from the last vestiges of fog. His keen eyes scanned the horizon, searching for answers beyond the obvious. "Watson," he said abruptly, "while the mastermind lies in custody, the tendrils of the Order of the Crimson Anchor extend far beyond this island. Our work is not yet done." I nodded, knowing full well the truth behind his words. Hargrave was but a single player in a much larger game, and the cryptic references we had uncovered in his journal hinted at a more sinister design. Upon our return to London, the city appeared transformed by the recent storm of secrecy and revelation. The morning papers ran headlines glorifying the naval victory and Holmes's role in unveiling the conspiracy. Yet beneath the veneer of triumph, a shadow lingered, an unease that something greater was yet to come. We reported directly to the Admiralty, where high-ranking officers debriefed us in a room filled with maps, naval dispatches, and hastily drawn charts outlining the recovered data from Rookhaven. Lord Hargrave, the estranged brother of the captured admiral, stood among them, a man whose presence carried the heavy weight of aristocratic authority and somber responsibility. Holmes addressed the assembled officers with his usual clarity. "Gentlemen, while the immediate threat has been neutralized, the evidence suggests that the Order's reach extends into foreign intelligence networks and possibly even Parliament itself. We must remain vigilant." One officer, Commander Evans, spoke with a mixture of skepticism and concern. "Mr. Holmes, do you truly believe that this organization could infiltrate such high levels without detection?" Holmes's gaze was unwavering. The sophistication of their operations, their use of advanced technology disguised as natural phenomena, and their strategic sabotage of merchant and naval vessels, these point to resources and influence that cannot be ignored. Over the following days, Holmes and I delved deeper into the shadowy world of espionage and political intrigue. We met clandestinely with informants, former sailors, and naval engineers who had whispered of strange transmissions and unusual fogs along the coast. Among these contacts was a remarkable woman named Isabella Trent, a cryptographer who had once worked for the Admiralty's Secret Communications Division. Her expertise was invaluable as we attempted to decode encrypted messages that revealed plans for further maritime sabotage. One evening, at a dimly lit tavern in the Docks district, Isabella met us with a look of urgency. "Holmes, Watson, you must understand, this is no ordinary conspiracy. The Order has access to secret codes and naval ciphers that could render the fleet blind." She produced a bundle of coded papers, their strange symbols and shifting patterns, a puzzle even to seasoned minds. Holmes examined the documents with intensity. "A formidable cipher, indeed. But with your assistance, Miss Trent, I believe we can unravel their secrets." Our nights became consumed by code-breaking sessions, the crackle of candlelight accompanying our painstaking work. Each decrypted message painted a darker picture: plans for coordinated attacks on key ports via the manipulation of weather patterns timed to disrupt critical supply lines, and references to a shadowy figure known only as the Admiral's Hand. The stress of the investigation bore heavily on me. Despite the thrill of the chase, the reality of lives imperiled and the nation's fragile security was sobering. One night, I confided in Holmes. "Do you ever wonder if this battle against shadows is endless? How can we fight foes who hide behind fogs and falsehoods?" Holmes's reply was steady and resolute. "Watson, the pursuit of justice is a candle in the darkness. Even the smallest flame can guide the way." Yet, as we edged closer to the truth, threats against us multiplied. Anonymous notes slipped beneath our door warned us to cease our inquiries. A shadowy figure was spotted trailing us through the misty streets, and Holmes's safe house was ransacked while we were away. The city itself seemed to conspire against us, but Holmes's resolve only hardened. They believe intimidation will stop us. On the contrary, Watson, it only confirms we are on the right path. Just as we began to uncover the identities of the Admiral's hand and other conspirators, a new piece of evidence arrived, an intercepted telegram pointing to a secret meeting at a coastal manor, scheduled for the dead of night. Holmes and I prepared to attend, our senses sharpened by months of relentless pursuit. This may be our opportunity to confront the Order's leadership directly, Holmes said. With our resolve steeled, we set out under a veil of darkness toward the manor, unaware that the final storm was gathering just beyond the horizon. The manor lay nestled against the jagged cliffs of England's southern coast, its ancient stone walls rising like a sentinel against the pounding sea. The night was heavy with fog, the same eerie mist that had cloaked so many of the vanished ships, and the air was thick with a palpable sense of foreboding. Holmes and I approached cautiously, our figures swallowed by the swirling vapors. The manor's silhouette was a dark blot against the silver glow of the moon. Windows shuttered and doors barred as if to keep secrets imprisoned within. "Watson," Holmes murmured, "the architecture suggests it dates from the late Tudor period, with modifications in the Victorian era. A fitting setting for shadows both old and new." I nodded, gripping my revolver beneath my coat. "Do you believe the Order's leaders will be here tonight?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "I am certain. The intercepted telegram pointed here, and the timing coincides with their plans to escalate their campaign." We slipped around the rear of the manor, guided by the faint glow of lanterns through narrow windows. A low murmur of voices drifted to us, their cadence urgent and conspiratorial. Peering through a cracked shutter, we glimpsed a gathering of men and women seated around a long oak table. At their head sat a figure cloaked in shadow, his presence commanding and cold, none other than Lord Percival Hargrave, Admiral Reginald's estranged brother. Holmes whispered, "The true leader of the Order, the puppeteer behind the curtain." Lord Percival spoke in a low, measured tone. "Gentlemen, the capture of my brother was regrettable, but not unexpected. His zeal was his undoing, yet our cause endures." A man beside him, a slender figure with hawk-like eyes, added, "Our technology must be perfected. The weather devices at Rookhaven were merely a prototype. Soon, the new installations along the channel will grant us complete dominion over the sea lanes." As they discussed their sinister designs, Holmes began to jot notes rapidly, piecing together the final strands of the puzzle. "They intend to control the weather to blockade England's trade routes completely," Holmes murmured. "Starve the cities, cripple the navy, a calculated siege of the modern age." I shuddered at the thought. Suddenly, a sharp sound, a floorboard creaking beneath our feet, broke the tension. A sentry, alerted by the faint noise, rounded the corner. Holmes reacted instantly, grabbing me and pulling me into the shadows. The sentry's lantern swung wide, eyes scanning, but he passed without notice. "That was too close," I whispered, heart pounding. "We must act quickly." Holmes's plan was daring. We would infiltrate the manor during the gathering and obtain tangible proof of the Order's plans. Documents, maps, anything that could topple their operation. Navigating the manor's labyrinthine corridors, we avoided patrols and silent alarms. The house groaned under the storm's rising fury outside, windows rattling as gusts of wind lashed the cliffs. At last, we found a study where several parchments and ledgers were spread across a desk. Holmes hurriedly gathered the papers, including coded messages, maps of coastal weather stations, and detailed schematics of the weather control devices. Our success was short-lived. A guard discovered our presence, sounding a warning. We fled through the manor's twisting passages, pursued by armed men. The chase culminated in a desperate scramble across the slippery rocks beyond the cliffs, the sea roaring below. Holmes's calm steadied me as we leapt from boulder to boulder, finally reaching the safety of the sea wind, where Captain Harrow awaited with the engines already thundering to life. Back on board with the stolen documents spread before us, Holmes worked through the night deciphering the plans. The Order intended to activate a chain of weather stations along the English Channel. each capable of generating lethal storms and suffocating fogs to trap and destroy naval and merchant vessels alike. This is no longer a mere vendetta, Holmes said gravely. It is an attempt to cripple the nation itself. Our next move was clear. We had to dismantle the weather stations before the order could unleash their full fury. Holmes enlisted the help of trusted naval officers and engineers. Plans were drawn, crews assembled, and supplies gathered for a covert operation along the Channel coast. Yet even as we prepared, the threat loomed ever closer. Reports arrived of strange fogs descending on other ports, ships disappearing without a trace, and intercepted communications warning of an imminent attack. In the days before our departure, I had a rare moment of quiet with Holmes. "Do you ever fear, Holmes," I asked, "that the evil we pursue is beyond our power to contain?" He looked out across the London skyline, his expression distant but resolute. "Fear is the enemy of action, Watson. We must be the shield against the darkness, no matter how vast it seems." The stage was set for a final confrontation, a battle not only for the safety of England's seas, but for the very soul of the nation. As the sea wind cut through the Channel's turbulent waters, I felt the weight of history upon us. The vanishing ships, the twisted vendettas, the clash of technology and nature, all had led to this moment. Holmes stood at the bow, eyes fixed on the horizon, where storm clouds gathered like a gathering army. "The storm is not over, Watson. It is only beginning." The sea wind sliced through the restless waters of the English Channel, a silver arrow against the swelling tempest. The sky above was a churning canvas of slate and steel, the clouds heavy with promise and peril. Holmes stood at the bow, his figure etched sharply against the brewing storm, eyes unwavering as the first crack of thunder rolled across the waves. "We are close, Watson," he said without turning, voice steady despite the wind's rising howl. "The final weather station lies on the cliffs of Blackstone Point, a natural fortress from which the Order can unleash their deadliest fog and storms." I braced myself, the memory of countless vanished ships burning in my mind, the cries of survivors etched forever in my soul. As we approached the rocky promontory, darkness fell like a curtain, and the sea wind dropped anchor in a concealed cove beneath the cliffs. The air was thick with moisture and the metallic tang of impending rain. Holmes briefed the small team of naval officers and engineers who had volunteered for the perilous mission. "Stealth is paramount. The Order's men are vigilant and well-armed. Our goal is to disable their machinery and capture any survivors for interrogation." The men nodded grimly, their faces pale beneath the lantern light. We scaled the cliffside under the cover of darkness, the wind whipping salt spray into our faces. The station was a hulking edifice of metal and glass, its strange antennas and coils pulsating with eerie blue light. The hum of the weather machine was a low, relentless drone, like the heartbeat of a monstrous creature. Holmes led the way, rifle slung across his back, every step deliberate. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a sentry alerting the garrison. A fierce firefight erupted, the night bursting into flashes of gunfire and shouts. Amid the chaos, Holmes and I fought side by side, the sharp crack of rifles mingling with the thunder overhead. We pressed forward, breaking through the defenses to reach the central control chamber. Inside, the mastermind awaited, none other than Lord Percival Hargrave himself, eyes blazing with fury and defeat. "So you have come to end my work," he snarled. "But England will fall, one way or another." Holmes stepped forward, unwavering. "Not while we still breathe, Percival. Your vendetta ends here." The confrontation was tense but brief. Hargrave, disarmed and cornered, revealed the depth of his bitterness, the betrayal he had suffered, the loss of his brother, and his twisted vision of cleansing England through chaos. Holmes listened, but offered no sympathy. "You chose destruction over duty. There is no honor in that." With the help of the naval officers, we dismantled the machinery, the coils sputtering and dying as the power failed. The storm's fury began to wane, the clouds breaking to reveal a tentative dawn. The surviving members of the Order were taken into custody, their ambitions thwarted. As we sailed back toward London, the weight of the ordeal began to lift, replaced by a cautious hope. Holmes, ever contemplative, stood beside me on the deck. "The seas will never be entirely safe, Watson, but for today we have held back the darkness." I nodded, grateful for his steadfast resolve. Another mystery solved, Holmes. But at what cost? He smiled faintly. The cost of vigilance, my friend, and that is a price we must always be prepared to pay. The puzzle of the vanishing ships was finally solved, but its lessons lingered. The fragility of progress, the dangers of unchecked vengeance, and the eternal battle between light and shadow on the high seas. Epilogue: Reflections in the Quiet Aftermath. The days following the storm were marked by a cautious return to normalcy. London's streets hummed once more with the clatter of commerce and the bustle of life. Yet beneath the surface lingered the memory of the vanished ships and the men lost to fog and treachery. The sea, forever a mistress of mystery, had revealed a darkness born not of nature, but of human malice. Holmes and I resumed our life at 221B Baker Street, the familiar surroundings comforting after months of peril. Yet even in the quiet study, the echoes of our recent adventure whispered on the breeze, a reminder that vigilance must never wane. One evening, as the amber glow of gas lamps filled the room, Holmes reclined in his chair, pipe in hand, eyes fixed on the dancing embers in the hearth. "Watson," he began, voice thoughtful, "the Order of the Crimson Anchor has been dismantled, but their ideals of control, of revenge, may yet find fertile ground in other corners of the empire. Power unchecked breeds chaos." I nodded. "It is a sobering thought, yet your efforts, and those of the Navy, have spared countless lives. A victory for reason and justice." Holmes smiled faintly. "Indeed. But remember, Watson, our work is never truly done. The shadows shift, and we must remain the light." The Admiralty honored the brave men who had risked all to thwart the conspiracy, their names inscribed in the annals of naval history. Admiral Reginald Hargrave's name, once shrouded in scandal and mystery, was posthumously cleared, the truth of his downfall finally revealed. As for Lord Percival Hargrave, he faced justice, not as the nobleman he claimed to be, but as a man consumed by bitterness and ruin. For my part, the case reaffirmed my admiration for Holmes's unparalleled intellect and unwavering dedication. More than once, I marveled at his ability to pierce the veils of deception and unravel even the most tangled enigmas. Yet, beyond the thrill of detection, it was the human element that stayed with me, the lives touched and saved, the fragile hope rekindled amid the fog. The sea remains a realm of endless fascination and danger, a place where mankind's ambitions clash with nature's immutable will. And while the mystery of the vanishing ships has been laid to rest, the lessons it imparted continue to guide us. In the quiet moments as I pen these reflections, I am reminded that vigilance, courage, and a steadfast heart are our greatest weapons against the unknown. And so, the case closes, but the story, like the sea, goes on. The end. Thank you so much for listening to our Honoring Audiobooks original Sherlock Holmes adventure. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know which story you'd like to hear next and where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our detective fans around the world. See you in the next adventure.